Chapter 2053. What? Shengguan Jing was confused. Even Tang Ke's name couldn't move her. What else could it be that could make her come here? Chu Luiyue was silent for a moment and suddenly laughed. I wanted to see what exactly happened between Mr. Su and Senior Tang Ke back then. Shengguan Jing was stunned for a moment, and then he suddenly remembered that Chu Luiyue already had several holy weapons. And those were all Mr. Su's. Could it be that the movement just now? He suddenly had a guess in his heart. Previously, Wei Zhe and he had tried to open this door with the halberd of 10,000 peaks, but it was in vain. Because the movement behind the door was not caused by the halberd of 10,000 peaks. Yu said so. Chu Luiyue didn't say anything. But in Shengguan Jing's view, this reaction was a tacit admission. He opened his eyes slightly, and for a moment, he was a little confused. How could this be? Could it be that this was not Tang Ke's tomb, but Mr. Su's? But the family Wei had always said that this was Tang Ke's tomb. If they hadn't gotten any evidence, they definitely wouldn't have been so sure. But now, Shengguan Jing frowned and didn't say anything. He just followed Chu Luiyue and kept walking down. What the truth was, perhaps they would know soon. Crack! A subtle sound suddenly came from behind. It seemed that something had broken, but it didn't seem like it. At the same time, there seemed to be a wave of power surging over. However, before it spread out, it had been suppressed. Sensing the movement, Chu Luiyue and Shengguan Jing looked back at the same time. What? What happened just now? Shengguan Jing asked curiously. He was very close, so he could clearly sense that the fluctuation came from Rongxiu's body. Rongxiu's thin lips curved up, and he smiled. Nothing, it's just that the halberd of 10,000 peaks has just recognized its master. Shengguan Jing was shocked and lost his voice. What? Chu Luiyue was also a little surprised. Just now. Rongxiu nodded and picked up the myriad peaks halberd. Even though the surroundings were bright and resplendent, one could still clearly see the streams of light above. They were extremely beautiful and extremely sharp. Originally, the process of a sacred artifact recognizing a master is somewhat troublesome. However, the 10,000 peaks halberd had already devoured a lot of Tianlei's power and was only one step away from completely awakening it. Therefore, he saved a lot of time and energy. Chu Luiyue raised his eyebrows slightly. In that case, I really have to thank family Wei properly. Rongxiu also laughed. Of course. Shengguan Jing stood between the two of them and listened to them chatting casually while taking the long halberd of 10,000 peaks, one of the 10 great divine weapons. He was speechless for a while. Only in his mind, a voice was crazily shouting, a saint artifact. That was a saint artifact. It recognized him as its master just like that. Most importantly, it's such a big matter. Can't you two give a little more reaction? What do you want me to do like this? Chu Luiyue looked at Shengguan Jing. Seeing that his expression was a little strange, he asked with concern, Taizu, what's wrong with you? Shengguan Jing took a deep breath. I'm fine, look at how nonchalant the children were. He couldn't embarrass himself too much. Rongxiu asked, perhaps. Taizu also yearns for the sacred artifact. Chu Luiyue nodded in understanding. I see. How about this? If we find other sacred artifacts in the future, we'll keep them for you, Taizu. Shengguan Jing slipped and hurriedly reached out to support himself against the wall beside him, barely managing to stand firm. Ahem. No need. Such treasures depend on one's luck. If one doesn't have that luck, it's useless even if they keep holding it in their hands. You don't have to worry about me. Wasn't Wei Zhe like this before? Although he had obtained the 10,000 peaks halberd, it still hadn't recognized him as its master after such a long time. On the other hand, Rongxiu had just casually held the 10,000 Peaks halberd in his hand and directly became its new master. It was useless no matter how envious, jealous, or hateful others were. They didn't deliberately lower their voices, so Wei Zhe, who followed them in, quickly heard these words. When Wei Zhe learned that the 10,000 Peaks halberd had recognized Rongxiu as its master, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. It wasn't easy for him to obtain it. The entire family Wei had only possessed this sacred artifact for thousands of years. However, as soon as he took it out, it became someone else's in the blink of an eye. Rongxiu, aren't you going overboard by doing this? Wei Zhe finally couldn't hold it in and questioned sternly. Previously, I was very polite to you out of respect for your identity as the Holy Son. Is this what you did? The distance between the two of them wasn't far. Moreover, the tunnel was bright, so they could see each other. Rongxiu chuckled. Family Wei is the Lord. Sacred artifacts have spirits, so they choose their own masters. It had been in your hands for so long, but you couldn't become its master. This only proves that there's no fate between the two of you. Now that the 10,000 Peaks halberd has chosen I as its master, how can I reject it? You! Wei Zhe was exasperated. However, Rongxiu's words were reasonable, and he couldn't refute them at all. If he had to blame someone, he could only blame himself for not having such luck. Wei Zhe couldn't help but feel regret. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have taken it out. Now, Tang Ke's tomb had been opened by Chu Luiyue, and the 10,000 Peaks halberd had become Rongxiu's. This was a huge loss. Chu Luiyue raised his voice slightly. Lord of Family Wei, since we're already here, you should save your energy. Who knows what dangers we'll face down there? After all, you're the Lord of Family Wei. It won't be good if you die here. Wei Zhe was furious. His face was ashen. These two people really knew how to infuriate people better than the other. A few Family Wei members behind him tried to persuade him in a low voice. Lord, we don't know what's going on down there. Why don't we wait and see? That's right. After all, it was Sheng Guanyu who opened the door. No matter what, we have to know what's going on down there. What do you think? If he fell out with the other party here, then who knew what would happen? When Wei Zhe heard this, he knew that they had a point. He could only suppress his anger for the time being. I'll get my revenge sooner or later. Silence returned to the passageway. Only the sound of everyone's breathing and footsteps could be heard. Although the surroundings were still bright and resplendent, the atmosphere became more and more tense as they went down, perhaps out of fear and worry for the unknown. The people behind them gradually caught up with them. Chu Luiyue didn't need to turn around to know that the people outside had all entered the passageway. Now, it would be even more difficult for them to fight for anything. After some time, they finally reached the last step of the passageway. She looked forward and was suddenly stunned. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2054. Not far ahead, there was an entrance. The entrance was in the shape of an arch and led straight inside. It was pitch black inside. No one knew what was on the other side and what kind of scenery it was. There was a biting cold wind surging out from inside. The strands of hair on Chu Luiyue's forehead fluttered gently and landed on her face, making it itchy. She casually tucked it behind her ear and walked forward. Wait. Sheng Guanjing hurriedly pulled her back. This place is very strange. It's better to be careful. Chu Luiyue chuckled and patted his arm. Don't worry. Since I can open this door, I'm not afraid of danger. Besides, aren't you and Rongxiu here? Only then did Sheng Guanjing relax a little. Actually, thinking about it carefully, Yu Er's current combat strength should not be much worse than his. If she summoned Dumpling and Ziqin, she would definitely win. She must have the strength to deal with Yi Wentao. Actually, if he came alone, he wouldn't have these worries. The main reason was that he couldn't let go of Chu Luiyue. Even though he knew that she was powerful now, his heart couldn't help but beat faster at the thought of her facing danger. Meeting Chu Luiyue's calm gaze, Sheng Wanjing finally let go of her. Chu Luiyue stepped forward and approached step by step. The surrounding lights were bright, but not a single ray of light could flow into the thick darkness. There seemed to be an invisible barrier at the arch-like entrance, completely dividing this space into two parts. Chu Luiyue walked to the front and stood still. Buzz. Standing here, the faintly discernible buzzing sound became clearer and clearer. Clearly, all of the commotion was coming from inside. Footsteps kept coming from behind. Obviously, more and more people were walking down. Everyone's gaze was focused on Chu Luiyue. Dead silence. Chu Luiyue's eyes were filled with determination. After gently exhaling, she clenched Scarlet Heaven's sword in her hand and took a step forward. Soon, half of her body merged into the darkness. Everyone held their breaths and didn't even blink, afraid that they would miss something. Tap. The sound of feet hitting the ground could be heard. Chu Luiyue's figure finally disappeared before everyone's eyes. A thick darkness shrouded everything in front of her eyes. She knew that she had passed through the entrance and completely entered this strange black space. But the surroundings were still quiet. Chu Luiyue could even hear his own heartbeat and breathing. She looked left and right. What entered his eyes was a thick black that could not be dissolved. A gust of wind blew over, bringing with it a slight chill. The buzzing sound seemed to be coming from all directions. Chu Luiyue listened carefully for a while, but still couldn't tell where it came from. She raised her sword, intending to summon a flame for illumination. However, the moment the reddish-gold flame appeared, it was quickly extinguished. Chu Luiyue was stunned for a moment. It seemed that there was some kind of force suppressing the surroundings. A faint layer of pressure seemed to be gradually enveloping her. I want to come out. Dumpling's soft voice sounded, with a hint of curiosity and anticipation. Chu Luiyue was a little surprised. Now? Yes. Although Dumpling was lively and active, she had always been very sensible. At critical moments, she always knew what she should and shouldn't do. It was rare for her to take the initiative to speak like this. Chu Luiyue only thought for a moment before agreeing. Okay. But you can't run around. You must follow me well here, understand? Dumpling hurriedly agreed. Yes. Dumpling listens to you the most. Only then did Chu Luiyue feel relieved. With a thought, Dumpling's figure immediately appeared beside her. A layer of reddish-gold flame burned on her body, but it seemed to be suppressed by some kind of power. The flame was slightly weak. Chu Luiyue's eyes narrowed slightly. Dumpling had opened her fifth meridian and was very strong. Adding to the fact that she had a pure bloodline, her pressure could not be underestimated. Even Yi Wentao had not been able to gain an advantage against her. Yet here, Dumpling's presence was still at a disadvantage. I wonder what is in this darkness. At this time, a strange ripple came from her body. She stilled slightly. This ripple came from the armillary's shield. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, a bright light suddenly poured down from above her head. Where the light reached, the thick darkness in the surroundings suddenly retreated. It was as if the dust accumulated over the years was suddenly wiped away, and everything gradually revealed its original appearance. All the scenes slowly appeared in front of Chu Luiyue. This was an extremely wide circular space. The tall walls were a dense and dark black, very similar to the armillary's shield. And on the circular wall, there were incomparably thick bronze doors. There was only a beam of light falling from the dome above her head, and it was unclear. Chu Luiyue was standing at the entrance of this huge space. With her as the center, there were 5 doors on each side. In total, there were 10 doors. The vast pressure was coming from these bronze doors. She stared blankly at the scene in front of her. She had never thought that it would be like this inside. Was this really Tangku's tomb? However, from the looks of it, it really didn't look like a tomb, and the 10 doors were all smooth and flat. There were no patterns carved on them. They were completely the same. Other than that, there was nothing else here. It was even too empty. The people outside also noticed the changes inside. Rong Xiao and the others walked in one after another. Shangguan Jing looked around and was also stunned. To think that he had been worried for a long time. Now, it seemed that it was very different from what he had expected. Chapter 2055. She held Scarlet Heaven's sword tightly in one hand and Dumpling in the other as she walked towards the center. Rong Xiao looked up slightly and stared at her. His gaze was deep and there seemed to be waves in his eyes, but they disappeared in an instant. The closer they got to the center, the clearer Chu Luiyue realized that the pressure on her body became. However, she did not sense any dangerous killing intent from it. The space was very big, and Chu Luiyue walked very cautiously, so it took them a while to finally reach the center. When they got closer, Chu Luiyue realized that there seemed to be some kind of pattern engraved in the center of the ground. However, probably because it was too old, it was already blurred and difficult to distinguish. Dumpling's eyes lit up and she was about to step on it happily. Chu Luiyue pulled her back. "Dumpling, do you know what that is?" Dumpling blinked and shook her head. "I don't know." Chu Luiyue. "I don't know why you want to go so badly." "Yes." Dumpling tilted her head and thought for a while. "I don't know what's going on either, but I really want to go." Chu Luiyue looked at her, her thoughts surging. What is it that can make Dumpling have such a reaction? You, don't worry. I can feel that it's not dangerous up there. Just let me go. Dumpling hugged Chu Luiyue's thigh and began to act coquettishly. Chu Luiyue touched her hair bun, feeling amused and helpless. Okay, just go. Dumpling's intuition had always been very accurate. Since she said so, then, there should be no problem. I knew it, you is the best. Dumpling's eyes curved in joy and she rubbed against her leg. Chu Luiyue grabbed her little hand and paused for a moment before finally taking a step forward. When her feet landed on the vein pattern, the faint buzzing sound from before exploded in her ears like a sudden clap of thunder. Whing! A ray of resplendent light suddenly erupted from beneath her feet. Chu Luiyue subconsciously raised his hand to cover his eyes. Boom! Boom! Something was gushing out of it. The sharp and biting cold aura was like the edge of a blade as it swiftly flew past her body, sticking close to her body and narrowly escaping. It took a while before it gradually calmed down. Chu Luiyue could faintly feel that there were streaks of light flickering around him. She was slightly stunned. She put down her hand and looked around. When she saw the scene in front of her, even she couldn't help but widen her eyes in shock as she stood there in a daze. As for the others present, they were all stunned. Looking at everything before them, they were speechless. In the vast space, streaks of light were densely packed and intertwined with each other. What entered his eyes was like a dazzling river of stars, causing him to be dazzled. And these, all of them were Tianlei. Countless dazzling silver bolts of heavenly lightning filled the entire space. They flowed slowly like water, yet they were brilliant, holy, and powerful. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped flowing. Everything seemed insignificant in the face of this vast and shocking power. Chu Luiyue stared blankly. These were all gushing out from beneath her feet just now. Dumpling screamed excitedly. "Aw! That's great! I knew it! I knew it!" She let go of Chu Liuyue's hand and started running as if she was running, passing through the countless bolts of lightning. She was like a fish swimming freely in the water, but also like a ball of fire burning freely with the wind. Her crisp and cute voice was especially clear in this quiet space. Wherever she passed, streaks of Tianlei energy rushed into her body like silver snakes. And the aura on her body began to rise at an alarming speed. Chu Liyue looked at this scene and finally understood. No wonder Dumpling was so eager and enthusiastic. It turned out that she had long sensed that there were countless Tianlei buried under the ground. Previously, in the Thousand Wine Mountain, she was the same. She soaked in the spring water that accumulated countless Tianlei energy for an entire month. It was also that time that Dumpling successfully broke through the shackles and became a crimson gold sky phoenix. This scene was so familiar, but it was not exactly the same. Because the Tianlei accumulated in the Thousand Wine Mountain spring was just a drop in the ocean compared to this place. There was no comparison between the two. Who knew how many years it would take to gather such a shocking amount of Tianlei? Chu Liyue suddenly thought of something and looked down. The ground under her feet had returned to normal. The patterns on it had also dissipated. She instantly understood something. That was a seal. At this moment, everyone finally came back to their senses. Why? Why are there so many Tianlei here? Perhaps they were all left behind by Senior Tangku. It's possible. After all, he was the top craftsman back then. His ability to trigger Tianlei is extremely strong. Wouldn't it be easy to refine a divine artifact here? Or perhaps, Senior Tangku's inheritance is here. All kinds of voices came one after another. Many people's expressions had changed from the initial shock and confusion to excitement and anticipation. There were even many people who were ready to make a move. Wei Zhe could not help but reach out his hand and reach toward the Tianlei closest to him. Chi! A scorching pain came from the center of his palm. Wei Zhe cried out in pain and quickly retracted his hand, but there were still shocking wounds on his hand. He was shocked and angry at the same time, and a deep sense of fear appeared in his heart. When he looked at the Tianlei again, his expression was very different from before. The surrounding people also looked over. Shengguan Jing sneered. These are Tianlei that contain extremely strong power. Even the exalted gods would find it difficult to deal with them. Family Wei, do you really think you're an ancient divine beast and can withstand the power of these Tianlei with just your body alone? The crowd roared with laughter. Wei Zhe's face turned red and white, but he had nothing to say. This time, he was too careless. When he saw Dumpling running happily over there, he could not help but reach out his hand. These Tianlei filled the entire space and moved slowly, automatically avoiding the crowd. However, if someone touched them, they would not avoid them. Wei Zhe only saw Dumpling's aura rising continuously, but he forgot that she was a crimson gold celestial phoenix. Ordinary people could not be compared to her. He gritted his teeth and said, I can't do it. If I can't do it, how many of you here can do it? These Tianlei's power is amazing, but we can only watch. As soon as he said that, the smiles on many people's faces faded. That's right. If they could only watch and not use it, wouldn't it be a wasted trip? At this moment, a deep, magnetic, and somewhat weathered man's voice was heard. These Tianlei are indeed for you to use. Chu Liyue suddenly looked up. The voice came from behind the bronze door. However, it was difficult to tell which door it came from. Chu Liyue said loudly. This humble one is Shengguan Yu. May I know your name, senior? The voice laughed. You trespassed on my territory, and now you're asking who I am. Chu Liyue's pupils shrank. Tangku. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2056. In this world, there were only a handful of people who could call themselves a saint. And Tang Ku, who had once refined 5 sacred artifacts, was one of them. Therefore, even if he had not seen the other party's appearance, Chu Luiyue immediately guessed his identity. "You are Senior Tang Ku?" Chu Luiyue asked tentatively. Even though he was 70 to 80% sure in his heart, he still had to ask this question. The moment the 2 words, Tang Ku, came out, everyone immediately stopped talking. They all pricked up their ears and listened attentively. This question was exactly what they wanted to ask. What answered Chu Luiyue was a meaningful laugh. "I didn't expect that after 10,000 years, there would still be people who remember this saint's name." It was indeed him. Chu Luiyue reacted extremely quickly, immediately cupping his fists and bowing respectfully. Junior has long heard of Senior's great reputation. It is Junior's fortune to have met you today. These words were true. As one of the only 2 powerful existences in the entire divine ruins who had ever refined a sacred artifact, Tang Ku was like an insurmountable mountain. His name was deeply engraved in the hearts of every weapon refiner. Most people would never have the chance to see a sacred artifact in their entire lives. Not to mention seeing Tang Ku. Now, the real Tang Ku had actually appeared here. How could they not be excited? Even if it was just a voice, to the weapon refiners present, they would have no regrets. After a short silence, Wei Zhe and the others also reacted and bowed. "Greetings, Senior Tang Ku." Many people were so excited that their faces flushed red, and even their bodies began to tremble. If it wasn't for the fact that they couldn't tell where the voice came from, they would have already knelt down. Tang Ku, however, laughed and teased, "Don't worry. This saint is only half a remnant soul now. How did you all see it?" Everyone was speechless for a moment and looked at each other. They did not expect Tang Ku to say such words. Chu Luiyue was also somewhat surprised. She had originally thought that an existence like Tang Ku should be high and mighty, sacred and dignified. But now, she felt that it was very different from what she had expected. "Girl, come over here." Tang Ku's voice came from all directions. No one knew which direction she was referring to when she said, "Go forward." However, they could all tell that this lass was for Chu Luiyue. In an instant, all eyes were on Chu Luiyue. Everyone had different expressions. Surprise, suspicion, uneasiness, envy. Who didn't want to win Tang Ku's favor? If Tang Ku was happy, he might even pass on everything he had learned in his lifetime. Chu Luiyue turned a blind eye to these gazes. She knew what Tang Ku meant. "Yes." She responded and stepped forward without hesitation. His feet landed right on the spot where the seal had been. At this moment, Chu Luiyue clearly felt a gaze that seemed to have materialized on his body. Her heart tightened. It was Tang Ku's eyes. But fortunately, this gaze wasn't aggressive. Chu Luiyue's expression was calm as she stood there calmly, allowing the other party to size her up. This was their territory. If the other party really wanted to do something, they wouldn't have waited until now. "You're not old, but you've got guts." Tang Ku suddenly snorted. His voice was dignified without being angry. "Do you know what kind of sin it is to disturb this saint?" As his voice fell, in the vast space, countless Tianlai suddenly changed directions and rushed toward Chu Luiyue. It was as if in the next moment, if she said one wrong word, these terrifying Tianlai would all strike down without hesitation. The atmosphere was tense, on the verge of breaking out. Peach Blossom Dock, Yu Mansion. In the courtyard, little Hachi was sitting at a stone table under the shade of a tree. In front of her was a basket of peach blossom petals that she had just picked. The sun shone down, and the shadows of the trees were mottled. A gentle breeze blew, and the branches and leaves swayed. The spots of light were like twinkling stars. It accentuated her jade-like skin, beautiful and enchanting. She picked up a petal from the basket and looked at it carefully. Then, she shook her head and revealed a look of slight disdain. Her delicate fingers, which were painted with nail polish, moved slightly, and the petal fell to the ground with the wind. There was already a large patch of pinkish-white petals at her feet. Then, she picked up another petal. Sister 8. 13 walked in from outside. His forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat, and he was panting slightly. Little Hachi raised her eyelids and glanced at him, which was rare. Just ran back. Yes. Big brother gave you extra training again. 13 nodded and pursed his lips into a smile. As expected, nothing can escape Sister 8's eyes. Little Hachi smiled, and there was a hint of pride in her eyes. Of course. Although it was not difficult for anyone to guess what had happened when they saw 13's current appearance, little Hachi had never rejected such compliments. Sister 8, why did you pick these petals? 13 asked curiously. Recently, Sister 8 seemed to be particularly relaxed. Little Hachi picked up a petal. Naturally, it's for bathing and smelling. It just snowed a few days ago, and the fragrance of these petals is at its strongest. Of course, we have to hurry. Otherwise, when the snow melts, the smell will be much fainter. The peach blossoms in Peach Blossom Cove were different from those in other places. She had only discovered this recently, so she was happily fiddling with these things. Those that don't look good, those that haven't bloomed properly, or those that have bloomed too much, can't be used. 13 was confused. This has a big impact. Anyway, they're all used for smelling. The shape and so on, it seems, there's no difference. Little Hachi shook her head mysteriously. You're still young, so you don't understand. This thing will affect Sister 8's mood, so it's very important. She had always spared no effort in this kind of thing and wanted to do her best. 13 nodded as if he understood. Anyway, Sister 8's words always seemed to make sense. 13. At this moment, a familiar voice came from outside the courtyard. Little Hachi and 13 looked towards the source of the voice. Dean Nan. The two were surprised. During this period, Nan Su Huai had been staying in Peach Blossom Cove, but he spent most of his time outside and rarely appeared in the U residence. So when they saw him, Little Hachi and 13 were very surprised. Nan Su Huai walked over. Little Hachi stood up and bowed together with 13. Nan Su Huai laughed. This old man just happened to pass by here. You don't have to worry about it, just do what you need to do. As he said that, he looked at 13 again and said with some emotion and surprise. 13, it's only been such a short time and you broke through again. 13 was now a stage 8 warrior. He smiled shyly. The cultivation environment here is good, so my cultivation is naturally faster. It's all thanks to Master and Big Brother. By the way, are you here today to look for Master? She's not here today. Wonderful book house. Previously, he didn't know much about the 13 UU, but this time, Chu Luiwa took down the Peach Blossom Dock. It could be said that the 13 UU had made a great contribution. Little Hachi in front of him was usually very delicate. She was very particular about her makeup and clothes. Just standing there, she was enchanting and could be said to be a stunner. However, when it came to doing things, she was not careless. Previously, in order to repair the medicinal herbs in the Peach Blossom Dock, she had been working with Shifang and put in a lot of effort. From then on, Nan Su Huai knew that he had underestimated the ability of the 13 UU. The people chosen by Yu seemed to have different personalities, but in fact, all of them were extremely outstanding. It was no wonder that 13 was unwilling to go to Lingxiao College to cultivate. Perhaps he would be able to learn even more by following these people. He wondered where you had chosen these people from back then. Nan Su Hui sighed in his heart. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, he left. After he left, little Hachi's body softened. She sat down again and focused on choosing the petals. 13. Xin Yi's voice suddenly sounded from outside. 13 hurriedly turned around. Big brother. Xin Yi raised his chin. Continue. Yes. 13 was already used to Xin Yi's training and hurriedly ran over. When he came to Xin Yi's side and saw that calm and indifferent face, 13 hesitated for a moment. Big brother, you don't seem to be worried about Master and the others. Xin Yi raised his eyebrows slightly. Is what Dean Nan said not enough? 13 was stunned. Based on Big Brother's words. Does he really think that Master will be safe and sound with Grand Ancestor and His Highness Saint around? Big Brother, you seem to. His Highness Saint is think highly of him. Admire him. Respect him. 13 was speechless for a moment and didn't know what to say. Big Brother was indifferent and arrogant. There were very few people who could enter his eyes. But it seemed that from the start, his attitude towards His Highness was very polite. Xin Yi glanced at him indifferently. It won't be too late to ask these questions when you become a high god. Clear ancient slope, messy stone forest. Tang Ke's questioning voice reverberated throughout the entire space, bringing with it a heavy pressure as it fell down heavily. Chu Liuyue's shoulders seemed to be pressed by something, and the blood in her body rushed quickly. Everyone also subconsciously held their breaths. Was Tang Ke going to hold Chu Liyue accountable? Amidst the silence, Chu Liyue raised her chin, curved her lips, and said word by word, "Senior, weren't you the one who let me in?" Dead silence. Many people looked at each other in surprise. What did Chu Liyue mean by that? Tang Ke let her in. How was that possible? Wei Zhe couldn't help but sneer. This Chu Liyue really thought of herself as someone important. Who did she think she was to make someone like Tang Ke do this for her? She was really bold. Tang Ke wouldn't let her off easily for saying such things. However, just as everyone thought that Chu Liyue was going to be punished for this, they suddenly heard a hearty laugh. Ha 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 ha. Girl, you're really smart. Tang Ke's voice was filled with undisguised joy and admiration. The atmosphere instantly changed, and the hostility from before dissipated instantly. Tang Ke's smile immediately stunned everyone present. What did that mean? Could it be that Tang Ke really took the initiative to let Chu Liyue in? But didn't he stay here and never go out? Then how did he get in touch with Chu Liyue? Hearing Tang Ke's voice, Chu Liyue's eyes curved slightly, but she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She had made the right bet. The reason why she was the only one who could open the door outside was because it was Tang Ke's idea. And the reason why he chose her out of so many people. Chu Liyue's hand slowly tightened as a guess flashed through her mind. Perhaps it had something to do with the armillary shield in her body. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2058. That's right. You were able to open the door and enter this place because of my instructions. However, I originally thought that you would come in by yourself. I didn't expect you to bring so many people with you. Tang Ke's deep voice reverberated in the vast space. Everyone had different expressions when they heard this. Why did these words sound so uncomfortable? Could it be that Tang Ke had chosen Chu Liyue alone from the beginning? And they were able to enter because of Chu Liyue. This made the people who were waiting to see Chu Liyue make a fool of themselves speechless and feel very upset. No one would be in a good mood after hearing such words. Shengguan Jing was very happy. Anyway, Yu was promising, and he was proud. If Yu really inherited Tang Ke's mantle in the end, he would be happier and more excited than if he got these things. Rong Xiu stood at the side with his hands behind his back. Upon hearing this, he tilted his head slightly and glanced at Chu Luiyue. His originally cold eyes and eyebrows had a faint smile on them. Chu Luiyue's lips curled up slightly. I was stupid and didn't understand Senior's meaning. Although she said that, her expression was relaxed and there was no regret or annoyance on her face. Tang Ke seemed a little surprised. Don't you think it's a pity? What's a pity? It's a pity. You could have enjoyed such a great opportunity alone. Little girl, this sage will give you another chance. As long as you agree, I can send everyone out now and only leave you alone. And all my inheritance will be inherited by you at that time. When these words were said, everyone was shocked and in an uproar. Senior Tang Ke. Finally, someone in the crowd couldn't hold back and stepped forward to speak. Senior, please reconsider. Although we can't open that door, in terms of talent and strength, we are not inferior to Sheng Guanyu in the slightest. In fact, we are even better. If you really want to choose someone to inherit your mantle, it must be the most outstanding person in the world. Sheng Guanyu may not be qualified for this position. Yes. Sheng Guanyu's cultivation as a martial artist was truly outstanding. Even at the high deity realm, he could fight against a supreme god expert. But in terms of refining, she may not be the best choice for you. You must consider it carefully. Senior Tang Ke, all kinds of voices kept coming, all trying to dissuade Tang Ke from making this decision. From their point of view, if Tang Ke really chose Chu Luiyue, it was really unreasonable and a big mistake. Of all the people present, which one of them wasn't better at refining armaments than her? In terms of strength and experience, she was the one who had no competition at all. I really don't know what's wrong with Tang Ke. She actually made such a choice. Tang Ke asked. Girl, what do you think? Chu Luiyue snorted inwardly. This senior Tang Ke was really not easy to deal with. If she wasn't afraid of these people and was worried that she would be besieged, she wouldn't have made such a choice and said such words. But the situation had changed. Wei Zhe knew that it wasn't good to keep suppressing Chu Luiyue, so he could only wave his sleeves. Then we'll wait and see Master Yu's glory. Tang Ke asked. Are you sure? Chu Luiyue nodded. I've made up my mind. Please enlighten me, Senior Tang Ke. Tang Ke laughed heartily when she heard that. Good. Since you've said so, I'll treat you all equally. It's easy to get my inheritance. The Tianlei here is something that I've accumulated for tens of thousands of years. From now on, you can think of all ways to devour it. There's no time limit for this competition. Whoever devours the most will be the final winner. Of course, if any of you can't withstand the power of the Tianlei and explode, I won't be responsible. It's up to you to decide what to do. The final winner will be able to open the 10 bronze doors and obtain my inheritance. Wonderful book room. As he spoke, lightning flashed in all directions, and fire blazed brightly. Some people were quietly sizing her up. When they saw this scene, their mouths couldn't help but twitch. Hiss. It hurts just looking at her. The crimson gold celestial phoenix. She really lives up to her name. Chu Luiyue looked at her and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Could it be that she was also like this in the spring of Thousand Wine Mountain? Don't worry, your master can win even if she relies on herself. Chu Luiyue gave her a reassuring look. You can go and play by yourself first. Dumpling trusted her very much. When she heard her words, she immediately relaxed and raised her small face to smile brightly. Then I'll go. With that, she tiptoed and rushed toward the place where the Tianlei gathered. For a moment, there was a crackling sound. The crowd fell silent. Fortunately, Wei Zhe said that just now. Otherwise, there would be no point in competing. Fortunately, Shangguan, you won't be able to hold on for long, someone in the crowd muttered softly. Clang! The sound of a heavy object falling to the ground was suddenly heard. Everyone who was about to go about their own business was shocked. They quickly looked over and saw a transparent cauldron suddenly appear in front of Chu Luiyue. That's the heavenly square cauldron. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2060. It was rumored that one of the 10 great sacred artifacts, the heavenly square cauldron, was in Chu Luiyue's hands. Because of this, many families and clans had forced their way to Fangzhou City and almost barged into Lingxiao College. This matter had caused quite a stir back then, so it was hard not to know about it. However, very few people had seen the heavenly square cauldron with their own eyes. Now that Chu Luiyue took it out without hesitation, it attracted many people's attention. The heavenly square cauldron was transparent and colorless karmic fire was burning inside. A heavy pressure was slowly emitted from it. I haven't seen this item in a long time. Tang Ke suddenly let out a long sigh. You and it are quite faded. Chu Luiyue smiled. This is my blessing. Tang Ke fell silent. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, she felt that Tang Ke seemed to care more about the heavenly square cauldron than the sacred artifacts he had made. Rong Xiao was here. It was impossible that he didn't know that the Thousand Peaks halberd was in Rong Xiao's hands. However, Tang Ke didn't mention it from the beginning until now. Instead, when she took out the heavenly square cauldron, Tang Ke, she lowered her eyes and suppressed the thoughts in her heart. No matter what, she had to win this round first. She sat cross-legged and seemed to be ready to activate the Tianlei. Many gazes fell on her. After all, the heavenly square cauldron was a sacred artifact. They were also very curious. It's rumored that the heavenly square cauldron is used to make pills. However, this competition is about activating the Tianlei. If she wants to win, she has to activate the heavenly square cauldron with the strength and means of a blacksmith. This and refining medicine are two different things. Yes. In the end, she probably can't even summon half of the heavenly square cauldron's power. It's a pity that the heavenly square cauldron is in her hands. Clang. An ear-piercing clang suddenly sounded. Everyone was shocked and hurriedly looked in the direction of the voice. Rong Xiao had unknowingly summoned the 10,000 Peaks halberd and stabbed it into the ground. The end of the 10,000 Peaks halberd was still trembling because of the remaining power. With Wanfeng's halberd as the center, several cracks spread out on the incomparably hard ground. One had to know that so many Tianlei had rushed out from the ground, but not a single mark was left on the surface. Rong Xiao's attack contained an astonishing amount of power. As far as I know, no one here seems to have a saint artifact. Since he had already fallen behind, instead of thinking about how to catch up, he was just waiting for others to make a mistake so that he could sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. I wonder when such a good thing would happen in this world. Rong Xiao's sword-like eyebrows raised slightly. His handsome and enchanting face seemed to be smiling, but the corners of his eyes and the tip of his eyebrows were filled with undisguised ridicule. His words didn't contain a single vulgar word, but it made many people's faces turn red with shame. Different from Chu Luiyue, who had just gained a foothold, Rong Xiao was already famous in the Divine Ruins world for a long time. All the major families and clans were always afraid of him when he was mentioned. If they met, they would be even more polite. No choice, this man was too ruthless. It was just that he hadn't fought much in recent years, especially this time when he came together with Chu Luiyue. Along the way, he had always been kind, gentle and elegant, causing many people to almost forget what kind of person he was in the past. At this moment, his move was obviously a warning. You is about to start the competition. Everyone, please be quiet and don't disturb her. Rong Xiao's expression was languid as he said indifferently. Everyone felt sullen when they heard this. Listen to this. Is this something a human would say? What does he mean by asking everyone to be quiet when she's about to start the competition? Who here wasn't about to compete? Could it be that they weren't participating in the same competition? This is too much. However, although everyone was dissatisfied in their hearts, no one dared to say anything in front of him. Looking at Rongxiu's posture, his thoughts weren't on the competition anyway. If anyone were to disturb Chu Luiyue, he would really do anything. They couldn't afford to offend him. Wei Zhe let out a long breath and tidied his clothes. Let them be arrogant for a while more. When the competition ended and they were utterly defeated, it wouldn't be too late to ridicule them and turn the situation around. After Rongxiu spoke and openly threatened, all kinds of discussions finally stopped. For some reason, Tang Ke didn't say anything during this process. Perhaps it was because of the Thousand Peaks halberd, many people thought in their hearts, but they quickly restrained their thoughts and began to focus on refining the divine weapons, preparing to trigger Tianlei. Shengguan Jing glanced at Rongxiu and asked curiously. Rongxiu, you don't intend to participate in this competition. Compared to you, his innate talent and strength were only stronger and not weaker. If you're worried that you won't win, don't misunderstand. Rongxiu knew that he had misunderstood, so he laughed and explained. I'm indeed not very interested in this. You can open the door and enter here first, which proves that she's the most suitable successor of Senior Tang Ke. No matter what others thought or how they fought, it was useless. Shengguan Jing thought about it carefully and felt that it made sense, so he didn't say anything else. Boom! A loud sound was heard. Shengguan Jing and the others hurriedly looked back and saw that Tianlei had already struck towards the heavenly square cauldron. Someone in the crowd couldn't sit still. So fast. The competition had just begun, and Chu Luiyue seemed to have just sat down. Why did the Tianlei come down? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2061. The Tianlei quickly flew down and fell into the heavenly square cauldron, disappearing in the blink of an eye. From the beginning to the end, it did not cause any ripples at all. Everyone was stunned, but they quickly came to their senses. A divine artifact was a divine artifact after all. It was naturally easy for it to deal with a few Tianlei. After some time, when the number of Tianlei increased, Chu Luiyue would not be able to withstand it and would give up. Just as he was thinking, another bolt of heavenly lightning struck down. Just like the first one, it quickly and quietly drilled into the heavenly square cauldron. The transparent karmic fire burned fiercely and swallowed it in an instant. Everyone had different reactions. Some were envious, some were jealous, and some had already looked away and started to focus on themselves. After all, no matter how they looked at it, it would not improve their results at all. If they had the time and energy, they might as well try their best to trigger more Tianlei. Perhaps they could even take a gamble. When one person started, the others followed suit. Soon, bolts of heavenly thunder began to fly in different directions. Shengguan Jing also stood beside Chu Luiyue and took out a sword embryo. This docking jade spiritual embryo is extremely precious. Fortunately, I did not have time to carefully polish it before. Otherwise, I would have wasted today's great opportunity. From all aspects, the heavenly lightning here was far beyond what he could summon. If he could use the Tianlei here to refine it, it would definitely be more convenient. The quality of the divine artifact that was forged would also be more outstanding. No matter whether he could obtain Tang Ke's inheritance or not, it was extremely rare and precious to be able to cultivate in this sea of lightning. Shengguan Jing slightly staggered his feet, and the docking jade spiritual embryo quietly floated in front of him. He closed his eyes gently and began to activate the power in his body. Soon, bolts of heavenly lightning struck one after another. The most shocking thing was that the Tianlei all fell on the same spot on the docking jade spiritual embryo. Some people who saw this scene from afar could not help but exclaim inwardly. I've long heard that Shengguan Jing is a top-notch weapon refining venerable. Now that I've seen it with my own eyes, he is indeed amazing. This level of control and sensitivity is indeed not something an ordinary person can compare to. After all, he was someone who had fought against 7 weapon refining venerables back then and remained undefeated. Although he had been in a deep slumber for 1,000 years, his strength had not diminished at all. He is indeed an extremely strong opponent. Rong Xiu, on the other hand, stood in the same spot, leaning on the Thousand Peaks halberd. His arms were crossed, and he looked lazy. From the looks of it, he really did not intend to participate in this battle. Yan Qing and Chang Wanzhou stood to the side in silence, waiting and guarding. In the vast space, only the 3 of them did not move. All kinds of noises gradually disappeared, leaving only the sound of Tianlei echoing in his ears. Chu Luiyue didn't seem to care about the outside world. He only stared at the heavenly square cauldron in front of him. As more and more Tianlei fell into the heavenly square cauldron, its pressure gradually increased, and its entire body became clearer and brighter. Chu Liuyue's force and mind were also constantly being depleted. However, his expression remained calm and focused. Time flew by quickly. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. Looking around, other than Rong Xiu, Yan Qing, and Dumpling, who was still running around, the rest of the people were focused on the competition. However, after so long, the number of Tianlei in this space did not seem to have decreased. This showed how terrifying the number of Tianlei was. However, Dumpling was very happy. Ever since that time in the Eye of the Thousand Wine Spring, she had not been so happy in a long time. It was so blissful to be here. There were so many Tianlei here, and the power they contained was so strong that it might be difficult for an ordinary person to bear. However, for Dumpling, who had just opened her 5th meridian, it was the most comfortable. She ran up and down, left and right, barefoot. Her body flickered with silver light, which had not disappeared since the beginning. Rong Xiu tilted his head, glanced at her, and finally raised his hand. A snow-white figure instantly appeared in front of him. It was Xue Xue. This is a rare opportunity. Go and play for a while. It was rare for Rong Xiu to be so merciful. Xue Xue was so moved that tears welled up in its eyes. It roared excitedly and ran out. Some people heard the commotion and looked over. When they saw that Rong Xiu had released his contracted magical beast, many of them were shocked. Although the white lion was also a divine beast, it was much weaker than an ancient divine beast. Otherwise, the people present would have released their contracted divine beasts long ago. Even if it did not count towards the final result, it was still good to increase the strength of the contracted divine beast. However, no one did so because they knew very well that ordinary divine beasts could not bear the power of Tianlei. Now that Rong Xiu had done so, roar. Xue Xue was extremely happy as it shuttled through the sea of lightning. Its body flashed with lightning and sparks. However, the crowd quickly realized that this did not have any effect on Xue Xue. Instead, it seemed that its aura was increasing continuously like dumplings. It was also devouring the power of Tianlei. After realizing this, many people felt stifled in their chests. It was fine that Rong Xiu was domineering and powerful, but even his contracted divine beast was more capable than other divine beasts. This was really unreasonable. Xue Xue was very proud when it sensed those gazes. It raised its neck and did a 360-degree turn in the air. It was simply too happy. Then, it swooped down and came to Rong Xiu. It was rare for it to be so close and docile. Now, it finally understood its master's good intentions. What was this small scene to it? Compared to what it had suffered in the Red Moon Desert, it was not worth mentioning at all. Its master was really far-sighted. If it had not gone to the Red Moon Desert a few times before, it would not be able to play around here now. Rong Xiu's lips curled up slightly. Xue Xue seemed to be encouraged. It spun around on the spot and ran away happily. This scene made the crowd want to vomit blood, but there was nothing they could do. They could only stare. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. At a certain moment, a muffled sound was finally heard in the quiet space. Bam! It sounded like something had fallen to the ground. Rong Xiu looked to the side. A middle-aged man fell straight to the ground. Blood kept flowing out of the corner of his mouth. His eyes were tightly shut, and his face was pale. He seemed to have fainted. However, he was still holding a short sword tightly in his hands. Streaks of silver light flickered on it. In the next moment, the silver light quickly spread to his entire body. No! A panicked voice came from the side. It seemed that it had a premonition of what was about to happen. Rong Xiu calmly retracted his gaze. Bam! The man's body suddenly exploded. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 2062. However, there seemed to be an invisible barrier around him, completely surrounding him. His body exploded, but before it could splatter, it had already quickly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, his body had completely disappeared. There was not a single trace of blood on the ground. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed that someone had died in such a short period of time. He did not even have time to cry out in pain or call for help before he had completely disappeared from this world. There were several people in the circle closest to him. At this time, they all stopped what they were doing and looked at this scene in a daze. One of them had a scar on his face. His face was as pale as a ghost, and his whole body was trembling. The person who died was his cousin. They had a very good relationship with each other. This time, they had specially come together. They did not expect that he would die just like that. Tang Ke's voice faintly sounded, I have already warned you before. Do what you can. If you disregard your own life because of greed and desire to win, then even if you die, you can't blame others. You only have one life. All of you, take care of yourselves. In the silent space, this voice sounded particularly cold and indifferent. A layer of coldness swept over and shrouded everyone. That's right. Tang Ke had already said what needed to be said before. That person's death was obviously because he could no longer bear the power of the Tianlei, but he still insisted on continuing to bear it. Who could he blame for not being able to bear it himself? If they wanted to win this fierce competition, if they wanted to become the top refiner, if they wanted to stand in the highest position in the world, who didn't want to? But how could it be so easy? Some people showed hesitation on their faces. In fact, it was already very difficult for them to persevere until now. Many people were already on the verge of collapse. They only needed one last push to end up like that man. Tang Ke said, if anyone wants to give up, just say so. I will let them go. The atmosphere was even more eerily quiet. After a moment, a man suddenly spoke. I give up. The person who spoke was Scarface, whose cousin had died earlier. It was a simple 3 words, but he said it with great difficulty. Even his voice was trembling. His eyes were full of struggle and unwillingness. It could be seen that it was extremely difficult for him to make this decision. However, he was very clear about his own understanding. His strength was slightly inferior to his cousin's. If even his cousin couldn't hold on, then how much better could he be? If even he died, the bloodline of the family would be cut off, therefore, no matter what, he had to protect his life. Even if he was extremely unwilling to give up, he had no choice but to do so. Tang Ke was not surprised. Apart from that, more than 10 people chose to withdraw. One had to know that there were indeed many people who came for Tang Ke's tomb in the beginning. However, after a batch of people died in the stone forest, there weren't many people who came in. Now, a few more people died and more than 10 people withdrew. There were only a few dozen people left in the competition. However, Chu Luiyue still didn't move. She sat there quietly, just like on the first day. The Tianlei continued to fall into the heavenly square cauldron. It seemed like she didn't have to worry about anything. If it weren't for the fact that everyone could sense that the origin power around her was indeed being consumed rapidly, they would have thought that she was using some sort of method to cheat. However, it was also because of this that people couldn't understand. Those who were in the competition didn't have time to pay attention to her, but those who were standing at the edge of the entrance were focused on Chu Luiyue. A group of people was discussing something in low voices. I remember that rumor has it that Sheng Wanyu is extremely outstanding in cultivation as a martial artist. She can fight against her eminence in the ascended god realm. However, no one has ever mentioned that she has any achievements in the field of weapon refinement. Why does it seem like she's not bad? She's more than not bad. To be able to persist until now, her ability is better than those of us who withdrew from the competition. In my opinion, we've all underestimated her. I heard that she has always been on par with Rong Xiao on Lingxiao College's master roll. On the master roll, Rong Xiao is number 1, and she is number 2. Moreover, she is Shengguan Jing's junior. Perhaps, she can really amaze the world this time. Remember the mobile version of the website. However, to be able to stimulate all the potential of the heavenly square cauldron, he does have some ability. I wonder if she regrets her initial decision. Do you need my help? Dumpling flew to Chu Luiyue's side and asked crisply. Chu Luiyue gently shook his head. I can't, and I don't need to. But, Dumpling pouted angrily. However, those people said that Yu was going to lose. Chu Luiyue looked up and smiled at her. Don't worry, Dumpling. She suddenly stood up. This was the first time she stood up since the start of the competition. As soon as he moved, he attracted the attention of many people. Even Shengguan Jing and the others who were focused on refining the divine artifact turned their heads to look at her. Tang Ke's voice rang out. Girl, are you going to admit defeat? Everyone held their breaths. Tang Ke didn't ask any questions when so many people had withdrawn from the competition. At this point, Chu Luiyue had just stood up when he spoke. However, everyone knew that Tang Ke had been paying attention to Chu Luiyue since the beginning, so they weren't surprised and waited patiently. Then, they saw the girl raise her eyebrows and smile. Why would I? She said slowly. I just wanted to get up and move my body after sitting for a long time. As she said that, she really did turn her waist and move her muscles and bones. Her posture was relaxed and her expression was relaxed. She didn't look like she was under any pressure from the competition. Pretentious. Wei Zhe sneered disdainfully. He didn't believe that she could do anything. Chu Luiyue tilted her head and glanced at Wei Zhe with a faint smile. It seems that the head of the family Wei is really concerned about me. Looking into those clear but dark and indifferent eyes, Wei Zhe's heart skipped a beat and he subconsciously looked away. Then he realized that he didn't look imposing at all. So he turned his head again and wanted to say something to get back at her. Swoosh. Just as he started to speak, he was interrupted by a sharp and cold sound of something breaking through the air. Something had suddenly appeared in Chu Luiyue's hand and was rapidly unfurling. It was a red scroll that looked like a painting. However, it faintly emitted a suppressive aura that no one dared to underestimate. Wei Zhe was still in a daze when someone in the crowd cried out in surprise. Flowing clouds flying illustration. Wei Zhe widened his eyes and didn't pay attention for a moment before he started coughing violently. Cough, 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 Chu Luiyue asked with concern. What's wrong with the head of the family, Wei? Did you choke on something? Wei Zhe's face was red from coughing. When he finally stopped coughing, he was about to defend himself when he saw Chu Luiyue smiling at him with the flowing clouds flying illustration in her hand. The words stuck in his throat couldn't come out. Flowing clouds flying illustration. It was also one of the 10 great divine artifacts. Why was this thing in Chu Luiyue's hands? That's right. This thing was the Nan family's treasure. Previously, the Nan family had suffered a great loss at the hands of Chu Luiyue. Even the head of the Nan family, Nan Yifan, had fallen at the Peach Blossom Cove. Therefore, it wasn't strange that the flowing clouds flying illustration had fallen into Chu Luiyue's hands. During the battle at the Peach Blossom Cove, Chu Luiyue had purposely released the news to intimidate everyone. However, the people outside weren't very clear about the specific situation. Chu Luiyue had specially instructed them not to spread the news about the flowing clouds flying illustration. Therefore, not many people knew about it. Now that she had suddenly taken it out, it naturally caused everyone to be shocked. Countless gazes fell on Chu Luiyue with different emotions. In the divine ruins world, even the first-rate families and clans might not have a divine artifact. However, Chu Luiyue alone had 2 of them. How could this not cause people's emotions to surge? Chu Luiyue turned a blind eye to those gazes. She unfolded the flowing clouds flying illustration, then closed her eyes and circulated the force in her body. Boom! 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 The numerous Tianlei above seemed to have been summoned as they descended one after another, heading straight for the flowing clouds flying illustration. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. For a moment, sparks flew in all directions in front of her. The brilliant and dazzling light reflected the calmness and indifference between her brows. This round, she must win. Chu Luiyue's sudden move stunned everyone present. After a long time, everyone finally realized what had happened. After a difficult mental struggle, they finally accepted all of this. No wonder Chu Luiyue was so confident. It turned out that she had already planned this from the beginning. If one divine artifact wasn't enough, there was another one. Who could withstand this? Even if it were the weapon refining venerables present, how many of them could go head-to-head with this? The key was that no one could say anything about her actions. After all, those 2 divine artifacts really did belong to her. Previously, they had tried their best to cancel Dumpling's qualification. They had thought that Chu Luiyue would be helpless from then on. Who would have thought that, and from the beginning, she had already asked clearly that the Tianlei triggered by the divine artifact would be counted in her final result. Tang Ke had said it herself. Who had the guts to refute and question it? Chu Luiyue was so young, but she was so scheming. Everyone had different thoughts, but Chu Luiyue didn't take these to heart at all. She had already given them enough face. If it weren't for the trouble and wanting to teach these people a lesson, she wouldn't have spent so much effort to deal with this competition. Only by defeating them fair and square would she be able to obtain Tang Ke's inheritance without any worries. Another few days passed. One after another, people chose to give up. In the end, there were only 3 people left in the competition. Chu Luiyue, Shengguan Jing, and Wei Zhe. Shengguan Jing was recognized as a powerhouse. Everyone expected him to stay until the end. As for the remaining 2 people, they were quite controversial. Chu Luiyue had 2 holy artifacts on her side. Even though the crowd had different opinions about this, they had to admit that she did have some capabilities. In comparison, Wei Zhe was more surprising. Although he was the head of the family Wei, had a noble status, and was quite powerful. Compared to the people present, he wasn't the best. After all, this time, there were refining big shots who hadn't come out of seclusion for many years. Normally, when he met these people, he would have to be courteous. But now, those people couldn't take it anymore and chose to withdraw, but Wei Zhe unexpectedly persisted until now. This was a little surprising. Rong Xiu glanced at Wei Zhe and smiled. The head of the family Wei is hiding his strength. Wei Zhe didn't seem to hear him. He was focused on devouring the power of Tianlei around him. There was a purple-black hammer in front of him. The hammer was engraved with ancient patterns, and its aura was restrained and heavy. The power of Tianlei fell on the hammer. He had taken it out at the beginning of the competition. Until now, it had devoured a lot of power of Tianlei, but it didn't change much. It didn't reach a state of saturation like the heavenly square cauldron either. This was interesting. Everyone could tell that the purple-black hammer was a venerable divine artifact. It was very powerful outside, but it wasn't enough here. But now, the amount of power of Tianlei it contained had surpassed the heavenly square cauldron, which was a divine artifact. At first, the people didn't feel that something was wrong, but as time passed, they finally realized that the hammer was indeed unusual. Rong Xiu glanced at it indifferently, and there seemed to be waves surging in his eyes. At this point, Tuanzi came to Rong Xiu's side, tilted its head, and sized up the purplish-black hammer as it muttered softly. She muttered, "Something is wrong with that thing." Rong Xiu looked down at her. "Oh. What's wrong?" Dumpling hesitated and said uncertainly, "I don't know. This. I can't say for sure, but it's just not right. It's like, Rong Xiu smiled. Dumpling couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, why are you smiling? Aren't you worried that you will lose?" Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. He looked lazy, but he was extremely confident. She will never lose. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 2065. Dumpling nodded seriously. "Yes. Since you and His Highness said that we won't lose, we definitely won't lose." As she spoke, she sighed regretfully. Sigh, it's a pity that Dumpling can't help much in this round. Rong Xiu smiled faintly. It's good if you can take this opportunity to improve your strength. After all, Dumpling was Chu Liuyue's magical beast. If Dumpling's strength improved, it would be a good thing for Chu Liyue. Dumpling was greatly encouraged and clenched her small fists. His Highness is right. Then I'll go now. Before her voice died away, the small reddish-gold figure disappeared into the vast Tianlei Sea again. Rong Xiu looked up slightly. More than 10 days had passed, but the number of Tianlei in this vast space didn't seem to decrease by much. Clearly, they had devoured a lot of Tianlei before, but compared to the vast Tianlei Sea, it was still not worth mentioning. Looking up, they could only see dazzling light and silver light flashing. After all, Tangku had accumulated Tianlei for 10,000 years. Rumble. Suddenly, a series of explosions came one after another. Rong Xiu looked away and saw countless Tianlei striking down at the same time. They went straight for Shangguan Jing. In front of him, the docking jade spirit embryo finally showed the shape of a sword after being polished by countless Tianlei for a long time. A layer of dazzling silver light covered it, making it almost impossible to look directly at it. The powerful pressure that was spreading out from above was still rising. More and more Tianlei landed on it and polished it bit by bit. Even Shangguan Jing's figure was shrouded by the brilliant light, making it difficult to distinguish him. Is Shangguan Jing's divine artifact finally going to be completed? Among the three of them, he is the only one who attracted the heavenly lightning purely by forging a divine weapon. If I remember correctly, the dark jade spirit embryo should have already devoured thousands of heavenly lightning during this period of time. As expected, he's powerful. Such ability really makes people sigh in admiration. Of all of us here, how many can be mentioned in the same breath as him? In my opinion, Shengguan Jing is indeed the best among us when it comes to refining tools. However, he did not know who would have the last laugh in this competition. Shengguan Jing had already reached the final step of forging the divine weapon in his hand. Countless bolts of heavenly lightning came crashing down, completely annihilating the long sword forged from the dark jade spirit embryo. At this moment, the energy in his body was almost completely exhausted. This was the largest amount of Tianlei he had ever triggered in his entire life when he was refining a divine artifact. Not bad. Without a doubt, this was a venerable artifact. Moreover, it was the most powerful existence he could refine in his entire life. The shocking commotion even attracted the attention of Chu Luyue and Wei Zhe. The two of them also raised their heads and looked over. Chu Luyue's eyes lit up. This was the first time she had seen Taizu refining a venerable artifact with her own eyes. It was even more shocking than she had imagined. Wei Zhe clenched his fists tightly, and deep jealousy surged from the bottom of his heart. He knew very well that with his talent, even if he cultivated for another 100 years, he would not be able to reach Shengguan Jing's level. Fortunately, he still had his own trump card. It did not matter if he could not compare to Shengguan Jing for the time being. Only the one who could last until the end would be able to obtain Tang Ke's inheritance. Thinking of this, he took a deep look at the purple-black hammer in front of him. Buzz! The sword hummed. Shengguan Jing finally stretched out his hand and gripped the dark jade spirit sword in front of him tightly. In an instant, terrifying sword chi spread out in all directions. It was almost about to cut open space. A gentle yet vigorous energy slowly surged forth, completely surrounding the sword chi. Tang Ke's voice sounded with a smile. This is almost the top level among the venerable artifacts. It's just a little bit away from breaking through the shackles and becoming a divine artifact. Shengguan Jing, you are indeed very outstanding. His words were filled with undisguised praise and admiration. In the current world, there were very few people who could refine a divine artifact of such a standard. Shengguan Jing carefully sized up the long sword in his hand and was very excited. The timing, location, and people were right. To a large extent, he was able to succeed this time because of the power of Tianlei here. Although he did not break through the threshold and truly forge a divine artifact, in fact, Shengguan Jing was already very satisfied. He knew that if he wanted to advance to the next level, it was far from as simple as everyone thought. Otherwise, after Tang Ke and Mr. Su, no one in the Divine Ruins world had successfully refined a divine artifact for 10,000 years. He vaguely sensed that if he wanted to do this, he would need some kind of help, but he was not sure what it was exactly. This dark jade spirit sword was the strongest divine artifact that he could refine with all his life's knowledge. He took a deep breath. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. If it were not for this place, he did not know how much effort he would have to put in to forge this sword. Tang Ke laughed. There's no need to thank me. After all, you're outstanding enough. Do you still want to continue this competition? Shengguan Jing paused for a moment, shook his head, and sighed with a smile. No. The crowd immediately quieted down. They were a little surprised by Shengguan Jing's decision, but they felt that it was reasonable. This sword had already exhausted his strength. Even if he forced himself to continue, it might be meaningless. It was better to end it here. In the last period of time, the dark jade spirit sword had devoured a lot of Tianlei. Compared to the three of them, it was still unknown who would win. Even if Shengguan Jing lost in the end, he had forged such a top venerable divine artifact. This time, he had made a huge profit. Okay. Tang Ke did not seem surprised by his choice. Here, you have devoured a total of 1,381 Tianlei, and you are currently ranked first. If the two of them can't surpass your number, the winner will be you. This number made many people secretly speechless. If you have the opportunity in the future, it might not be impossible for you to refine a divine artifact. Tang Ke's last sentence immediately made everyone suck in a breath of cold air. Was this an admission that Sheng Wanjing had the potential to refine a divine artifact? Sheng Wanjing's heart skipped a beat, and then he lowered his head slightly. Thank you for your kind words. Everyone had different expressions, and the way they looked at Sheng Wanjing was very different from before. Since Tang Ke had said so, it was basically confirmed. Even if Sheng Wanjing did not win this time, the news of what he saw today was enough to shock the world and make them admire him. Sheng Wanjing cupped his fists and bowed politely. Then, he turned around and walked towards the entrance. Seeing his arrival, everyone couldn't help but feel nervous. Sheng Wan, congratulations. The few old men who came with Sheng Wanjing were the first to react and went forward to congratulate him. The rest of the people hurriedly echoed. Congratulations, Senior Sheng Wan. Senior has been silent for many years. Now that you're making a move again, it's indeed amazing. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 2066. Everyone's attitude had an obvious change. After Tang Ke and Mr. Su, no one else in the Divine Ruins world had successfully refined a divine weapon in the past 10,000 years. Now Tang Ke had personally said that Sheng Wanjing had a chance. This was the first one in 10,000 years. Naturally, it was different. In the past, although Sheng Wanjing was also famous, there were many weapon-refining venerables in the world, and each of them was very arrogant. No one was willing to lower their heads and admit defeat. Even if they met, they couldn't stand each other. This was also why some people secretly mocked Sheng Wanjing, Chu Luyue, and the rest at the start. But it was different now. Tang Ke's words were like gold. From now on, who could be compared with Sheng Wanjing? The future weapon-refining saint, these few words, just thinking about it, made people feel the pressure increase by several times. If Sheng Wanjing really succeeded in breaking through in the future, he would be worthy of being the top weapon-refining master. At that time, it wouldn't be so easy to make friends with him. If they didn't seize the opportunity now, how could they have a chance in the future? Everyone was much more polite and respectful to Sheng Wanjing. They were afraid that he would remember their previous offense. Sheng Wanjing smiled and cupped his hands. Thank you for your compliments. I'm just lucky. I don't dare to expect anything else. Now, I only hope that you can successfully end this competition. Although he was smiling, he was very polite. His eyes were clear and calm. Obviously, he didn't take the crowd's eagerness and flattery seriously. After that, he raised his eyes and looked at Chu Luyue, who was still in the field. It was obvious that he was stubborn. Seeing this, everyone could only temporarily dispel the many thoughts in their hearts. Sheng Wanjing had lived for so many years. He had once been all-powerful and had experienced life and death. What kind of scene had he not seen? Such an old fox was very slippery. At this time, it was useless to say anything. The crowd gradually quieted down. No matter what, they could only wait until the competition was over. Now, only Chu Luyue and Wei Zhe were left in the field, and they were still in the final competition. Above the two of them, Tianlei was continuously gathering and then falling continuously. In the entire space, everyone was silent. Time seemed to pass extremely slowly. At this point, everyone was certain that there was something wrong with the purplish-black hammer in front of Wei Zhe. What was it that could contain more Tianlei than the sacred tool? However, the competition was still ongoing. Since that item was indeed Wei Zhe's, it wasn't considered a violation of the rules. Naturally, everyone could only watch. In the silence, Tang Ke's voice rang out once more. Wei Zhe, 1382. A commotion broke out in the crowd. The amount of Tianlei that Wei Zhe had devoured had already surpassed that of Sheng Wanjing. This also meant that Sheng Wanjing was not fated to be first. Some people peeked at Sheng Wanjing, only to find that he was calm and did not seem to be disappointed. Sheng Wanjing had a bright future after being praised by Tang Ke. Even if he didn't win this round, it wouldn't affect him much. In fact, Sheng Wanjing cared more about Chu Luiyue than whether he won or lost. Now, he only hoped that she could defeat Wei Zhe. There was something wrong with Wei Zhe's hammer. He didn't know how long it could last. After such a long time, the flowing cloud flying diagram seemed to be almost full. Looking at that calm face, Sheng Wanjing clenched his fists. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. The past few days felt like a year to them. However, the winner of the competition hadn't been decided yet. Chu Luiyue had consumed a lot of force and spirit. At this moment, her face was a little pale, and her lips were pale. There was a faint bruise under her eyes, and she looked really haggard. Wei Zhe's situation seemed to be much better than Chu Luiyue's. After all, he was older, and in all aspects of cultivation, he was stronger than Chu Luiyue. If this continued, the one who would win in the end would probably be Wei Zhe. At this moment, the speed of Tianlei above the flowing cloud flying diagram had greatly decreased. Obviously, the number of Tianlei that the flowing cloud flying diagram could accommodate had reached its limit. Chu Luiyue stood up again. Wei Zhe turned his head, glanced at her, and snorted. What's wrong? Is Master Yu going to stretch your muscles again? The two saint artifacts were already saturated and she herself was obviously exhausted. He didn't believe that she could still come up with any tricks. This sentence was nothing more than sarcasm. However, Chu Luiyue acted as if she didn't understand him and smiled. She smiled and said, Master Family Wei is really prophetic. Nothing can be hidden from your eyes. Wei Zhe choked. Then, he saw Chu Luiyue raise her head slightly and ask, May I ask Senior Tang Ke, how much is the difference between me and Master Family Wei? Tang Ke said, Now, you are at 1562, and Wei Zhe is at 1895. The difference between the two of them was more than 300. This was definitely not a small number. Especially under the premise that the two of them had such a terrifying number. Even if there was only one extra Dao, it was not to be underestimated. How could Chu Luiyue catch up with such a huge difference? She looked like a lamp that had run out of oil. Chu Luiyue thanked him and then lowered her head slightly, as if thinking about something. Wei Zhe laughed and pretended to comfort her. Master Yu, actually, it's already extraordinary that you can persevere until now. Now you are still young. In the future, you may be able to defeat me. What's the point of winning then? Chapter 2067. She looked up and glanced at Wei Zhe. Patriarch Wei, is it convenient for me to ask you something? How much of this hammer of yours have you unleashed? The corner of Wei Zhe's eyes twitched. How could she ask so directly? She's too rude. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, Master Yu, I advise you to stop struggling. Even if you have a third divine artifact, how much strength do you have left? It won't do you any good to hold on and exhaust your body. Chu Luiyue smiled. I know my own body well, so you don't have to worry about it. You just have to answer my question. Wei Zhe frowned. Chu Luiyue blinked. It seems that you don't want to talk about it. But it doesn't matter. After all, we're competitors now. It's normal for you to react this way. Wei Zhe felt suffocated. He shouldn't have asked this question. Why did it sound like he was being stingy when she said it? If that's the case. I can only do my best. Chu Liyue sighed. Wei Zhe was amused and angry at the same time. Why? Did Master Yu hold back before? Chu Liyue curled her lips and didn't say anything. Instead, she suddenly took 3 steps back. Then, with a thought, a stream of light flew out from the interspatial ring on her hand. A venerable artifact. Someone said in a low voice. The sword qi was piercingly cold. What Chu Liyue summoned was her own red Shao sword. Wei Zhe was stunned at first, but then he couldn't help but laugh. Why? Master, you can't summon more divine artifacts now, so you've replaced them with a venerable artifact. However, even if your cultivation as a craftsman isn't high, you should know that there's a huge gap between a venerable artifact and a divine artifact, right? So what if you summon another venerable one artifact? The scarlet heaven sword floated in the air. Chu Liyue flicked his finger, emitting a clear and melodious sword cry. She narrowed her eyes and her red lips curled into a small, playful smile. A venerable one's divine weapon is naturally insignificant in this battle. But who said I would only summon one? Just as she finished speaking, several streams of light gushed out from her palms. Qi! Qi! Dazzling rays of light appeared one after another and arranged themselves neatly in front of Chu Liyue in the blink of an eye. Wisps of aura spread out from it. 1, 2, 3, 8. Wei Zhe subconsciously counted again. Every time he called out a number, his eyes widened. As he counted to the end, his voice began to tremble, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. 8 pieces, 8 venerable artifacts? She must be crazy. She had summoned so many at once. Was she planning to use them to trigger Tianlei? She must have a death wish. Not only Wei Zhe, but the others who were watching were also in a state of confusion. Some suspected that they had seen wrongly and even counted back and forth a few times. However, there were indeed 8 pieces. The crowd was in an uproar. I remember now. Chapter 2068. This time, the number of Tianlei that came crashing down was several times more than before. Sparks flew everywhere, and the light was blinding. Even Chu Liyue's figure was almost shrouded by the white light, and it was difficult to see clearly. The rumbling sounds came one after another, almost causing one's ears to buzz. Wei Zhe looked at the scene in front of him in a daze, and for a moment, he actually forgot to move. Chu Liyue actually summoned so many Tianlei at once. How did she do it? Her force and spirit had already been exhausted to a terrifying extent, and logically speaking, she should be at her limit now. But how did she become even stronger? This time, not only did she use the Great Green Sun Axe, but she also used 8 venerable artifacts. There was indeed a huge gap between a venerable artifact and a holy artifact that was difficult to cross. However, when there were many of them, the accumulated power was also very shocking. At the very least, the number of Tianlei summoned by Chu Liyue combined was not inferior to the Great Green Sun Axe. If she continued to progress at this speed, it wouldn't be long before the gap between the two of them would be closed. At that time, Wei Zhe might even be overtaken. What the hell? After a while, Wei Zhe came back to his senses and could not help but curse. Originally, he was sure to win. Now that he had been tossing around like this, he had consumed a lot of energy. However, no matter what, Chu Liyue had already continued, and it was useless for him to say anything. Helpless, Wei Zhe could only try his best to calm the anger in his heart and refocus his attention on the purple-black hammer in front of him. However, listening to the continuous movements from Chu Liyue's side, he could not completely calm down. Every once in a while, he could not help but turn his head to look. He had always thought that Chu Liyue was only using this radical method to win, and that she would not be able to last long. However, a quarter of an hour passed. 2 hours passed. The situation on Chu Liuyue's side was still the same. The gap between the two sides was constantly shrinking. Wei Zhe gradually became impatient. He wanted to control the dark purple hammer in front of him to speed up the devouring of Tianlei, but he knew it was impossible. After all, this thing was not under his control. Thinking of this, Wei Zhe took a deep breath. In any case, there was no time limit for this match. He did not believe that Chu Liyue could keep doing this. Shui flew back from Tianlei Sea and arrived at Rongxiu's feet. It stretched and licked its claws before lying down in satisfaction. One could vaguely see a few silver snake-like streams of light flashing across its snow-white fur. The aura around its body was also much stronger than before. It could be seen that after this trip, it had devoured a lot of energy, and its strength had greatly increased. No matter what, it can't be so stable. If there was no problem, he would have been defeated long ago. How could he have lasted until now? I think it's not that he's powerful, but that his hammer is extraordinary. But that's just a venerable artifact. I wonder how he did it. All kinds of discussions could be heard one after another. Shengguan Jing's gaze kept wandering between the two of them. Every time he looked at Wei Zhe, he would frown. The current situation was that everyone knew that there was something wrong with Wei Zhe's hammer, but they did not know what the problem was. He had been observing for a long time, but he still did not find anything unusual. It was as if his hammer was a bottomless pit. Thinking of this, Shengguan Jing became even more worried. Although Chu Liyue had been chasing after him quickly, it had consumed a lot of her energy. What if the competition was still not over after the Great Green Sun axe and the venerable artifact were full? He could tell that she really wanted to win. At this moment, Wei Zhe suddenly moved. He cut his palm, and a stream of red blood flew out and landed on the purplish-black hammer. For a moment, the wind whistled. Remember the mobile version of the website. Chapter 2069. His sudden action shocked everyone. Because it was too sudden. For such a long time, no matter what happened, Wei Zhe had always been very calm. No one expected him to suddenly attack at this time. Could it be that he's anxious because he's about to be caught? Many people guessed. This was also the most reasonable explanation. The warm blood landed on the hammer and was absorbed in the blink of an eye, leaving no trace behind. Then, the patterns on it seemed to light up a little. An astonishing aura spread out from it. The Tianlei above seemed to be summoned by some kind of power and began to surge over quickly, gradually forming a silver vortex. And Wei Zhe was at the center. No, to be precise, it was the hammer in front of him. Chu Liyue also placed a holy artifact in front of her, but the feeling they gave off was very different. On Chu Liyue's side, everyone could clearly feel that she was the one who activated these holy artifacts and venerable artifacts, attracting the Tianlei. On the other hand, Wei Zhe's side, it was more like the hammer itself was attracting the Tianlei to fall one after another. Wei Zhe's presence seemed to be somewhat dispensable. Wind and thunder rolled. This commotion also alarmed Chu Liyue. She turned her head and narrowed her eyes dangerously. At this moment, Wei Zhe's condition was very strange. His face was very pale, and large beads of sweat fell from his forehead. There was also a trace of blood slowly seeping out from the corner of his mouth, which he quickly wiped away. The aura on his body was also much weaker than before. In the eyes of others, perhaps it was because he had suddenly erupted and used all the power in his body to trigger the Tianlei. However, Chu Liyue did not think so. Because Wei Zhe's appearance was not purely due to the exhaustion of origin power and spirit. Chu Liyue's gaze turned slightly and looked at the hammer in front of him thoughtfully. For some reason, she felt that Wei Zhe was the one being controlled, family Wei master. Chu Liyue suddenly opened her mouth and called out to him. Wei Zhe did not seem to hear her and did not react. His eyes were still fixed on the hammer in front of him. Family Wei Master. Chu Liuyue's voice rose a little. This time, Wei Zhe finally turned his head. Chu Liuyue's heart sank. Wei Zhe's face was as pale as a ghost, and his aura and spirit were very dispirited. Compared to before, he was like a completely different person. Furthermore, all of this was because he had cut open his palm and left a trace of blood on the hammer. What shocked and worried her the most was Wei's eyes. When he first turned his head and looked at her, his eyes were lifeless, as if they were shrouded in a thick layer of fog. Although his expression quickly returned to normal and only a deep fatigue was left in his eyes, Chu Liyue still felt that something was wrong. Family Wei Master, I return all the words you said to me just now. Although the competition is important, your health is the most important thing. Chu Liyue said word by word. A trace of anger and resentment appeared in Wei Zhe's eyes, but he did not say anything. He only turned his head and ignored her. This time, Chu Liyue was even more certain of her guess. However, what she did not understand was that if she could sense that something was wrong, then Tang Ku could as well. But why didn't he say anything until now? More and more people from Tianlei flocked to Wei Zhe. Chu Liyue had finally evened the score with great difficulty. Now that Wei Zhe suddenly made such a move, the gap between them widened again. Seeing the situation change again, the onlookers unconsciously quieted down and waited with bated breath. They could all see that both of them had used their last trump cards. The winner or loser would be revealed soon. Shengguan Jing slowly clenched his fists. The key to the problem now was not only that Wei Zhe was faster than Chu Liyue in devouring Tianlei, but more importantly, Wei Zhe had already started to snatch Tianlei. The people from Tianlei, who were originally flocking to Chu Liyue, seemed to be attracted by some kind of power on Wei Zhe's side. They all changed their direction and went straight there. On Chu Liyue's side, the number of people from Tianlei was getting smaller and smaller. Even if she could still hold on, if she couldn't compete with Wei Zhe, the result would be the same. Shengguan Jing wasn't the only one who noticed this. Many of the blacksmiths who were watching the battle also noticed this. I didn't expect Wei Zhe to be so powerful. He actually managed to snatch Tianlei from Shengguan Yu. If this goes on, he will monopolize the market. When that happens, Shengguan Yu will definitely lose. Usually, when two people fight for Tianlei, one of them has to be much stronger than the other to be able to do so. However, Wei Zhe's strength isn't the best in this aspect. Moreover, Shengguan Yu has several divine artifacts. How can this be? No wonder Wei Zhe was so arrogant just now. It turns out that he has such a powerful trump card. This time, he is going to win. Even if Shengguan Yu has a divine artifact, it will be difficult for them to compete with him. All kinds of noises entered her ears. Chu Liyue retracted her gaze and gently closed her eyes. Of course, she understood what they were talking about. At this moment, the Tianlei was no longer surging toward her. Even the Sun Great Axe and the other weapons were still holding back. If this went on, she naturally couldn't. After pondering for a moment, she raised her hand, and with a thought, she recalled all the items in front of her. Soon, there was only emptiness left around her. When the crowd saw this, they subconsciously fell silent. Is she going to admit defeat? Taking drastic measures to deal with the situation. Family Wei is really powerful. Chu Liyue said. Wei Zhe looked over again with a strange smile on his face. It's not too late to admit defeat. Chu Liyue smiled and ignored his words. She only clapped her hands, dusted off the dust on her body, and looked up. What I hate the most in my life is when people rob me of my things. Her voice was very soft, as if it would be blown away by the wind at any moment. Family Wei, since that's the case, why don't we have a bet and see who will be the winner? Wei Zhe was stunned and immediately frowned. You're not mine, right? In the next moment, the woman suddenly tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and flew out like an arrow leaving the bow. She headed straight for the endless sea of lightning. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2070. This action immediately caused everyone to be greatly shocked. Is she crazy? She actually wants to barge into the Thunder Sea. Those Tianlei contain extremely shocking power. She's really not afraid of death by doing this. Wei Zhe just used his hand to grab it before and was directly burned. She's really bold to rush in rashly. I guess she's unhappy that those Tianlei were forcefully taken away by Wei Zhe. She's indeed quite capable, but she's still young and frivolous. That Thunder Sea is no different from a place of life and death for human cultivators. Does she think that she can freely travel through it like a crimson gold sky phoenix? Obviously, everyone was very pessimistic about Chu Liuyue's actions. Some people secretly shook their heads as if they had already seen the result. The few people standing beside Sheng Wanjing couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Sheng Wanjing, are you really not worried at all? Sheng Wanjing's face was expressionless, and no one could tell what he was thinking at this time. Hearing this, he paused and said, Yu never does anything that she's not confident in. Courting death. He didn't think so. She must have her own reasons for daring to do this. I believe in her. In the eyes of the surrounding people, Sheng Wanjing's words were just stubborn. After all, she was his most beloved junior. How could he really not be worried? This was not Peach Blossom Dock, where she could do whatever she wanted. They couldn't see anything from Sheng Wanjing's expression. Some people turned their eyes slightly and looked at Rongxiu. At this moment, he was looking up, and his thin scarlet lips were slightly raised. His smooth jawline was raised like a jade carving. There seemed to be waves surging in his phoenix-like eyes that were as deep as the sea. From afar, not only was he not worried at all, he seemed to be quite interested. Needless to say, this person seemed to be more ambitious than Sheng Wanjing. Many people looked at each other. It was probably because Chu Liyue defeated Yi Wentao previously, which made them extremely confident in Chu Liyue. So much so that they even felt that Chu Liyue could easily deal with such a situation. After the initial shock, Wei Zhe quickly regained his senses. His pale and colorless lips were tightly pursed. His eyes were cold, and there was a hint of cold ridicule at the corners of his eyes. Insolence. It was true that she had contracted the crimson gold heavenly phoenix, but that didn't mean that she had the same amazing physical strength as the crimson gold heavenly phoenix. In the previous battle with Yi Wentao, it was said that to a large extent, he had relied on the two contracted mythical beasts to achieve victory. As for herself, in the end, he was only a high deity. How could a mortal body resist this endless Tianlei? Wei Zhe looked up and sneered, waiting for Chu Liyue to return in defeat. Countless pairs of eyes were also focused on that figure at this moment. Chu Liyue flew into the air and stood in the middle. Countless heavenly lightning bolts slowly drifted across the surroundings. Layers of oppressive might spread out from it, making it hard for everyone to breathe. Chu Liyue's figure was inconspicuous and extremely small here. Her figure was slender and slightly frail. It was as if any bolt of heavenly lightning could easily pierce through her. Chu Liyue took a deep breath and looked at the Tianlei flowing around her. These heavenly thunders would dodge on their own. As long as one didn't take the initiative, one wouldn't be injured. Previously, Wei Zhe's palm was burned when he reached out to touch the Tianlei out of curiosity. After the others present saw that he had learned his lesson, they all acted carefully and the same thing didn't happen again. However, if this continued, these Tianlei would all be snatched away by Wei Zhe. So, she had to come. Chu Liyue made up her mind and reached out, countless people held their breaths and didn't blink, afraid that they would miss something. Chu Luiyue grabbed a tianlei in her hand. For a moment, sparks flew everywhere. However, just when everyone thought that Chu Luiyue was going to be injured, they saw that her expression didn't change and her heart didn't beat faster. It was as if she wasn't affected at all. Then, she exerted force in her hand, and the tianlei shattered into countless fine streams of light that surged into her body one after another. A tianlei was crushed and devoured by her bare hands just like that. Everyone was stunned. What's going on? Not only did the tianlei not cause her any harm, but it also turned into her own power. No! What's that in her hand? Someone in the crowd suddenly shouted. Everyone looked over instinctively and saw that there seemed to be a dazzling light flickering in Chu Luiyue's hand. That's a divine body. Wei Zhe suddenly realized something. His eyes widened in shock, and his face was full of disbelief. Many people reacted when they heard him say that. That's right. Other than a divine body, what else could help her block that terrifying tianlei? Upon closer inspection, Chu Luiyue's body was indeed covered by a layer of dazzling soft armor. She floated in mid-air, and her body was glowing faintly. She was so small in the sea of lightning, yet so dazzling. She was like a twinkling star that couldn't be ignored. A divine body. There are so many divine bodies in the world. Why don't I have any impression of her? Yeah. I've been looking at her for a while, but I can't remember what kind of divine body she cultivated. Dazzling light, soft armor, this. Wait. Could it be? Someone seemed to have guessed something, but felt that it was too ridiculous. He hesitated and didn't dare to say anything. At that moment, Chu Luiyue raised her hand again and grabbed at the second tianlei. Chapter 2071. She waved her hand. Come here. The tianlei in front of her didn't move. There was a hint of coldness in her eyes. I said, come here. When the crowd below saw this scene, they were all at a loss. What's Shengguan Yu doing? I think she's greeting the tianlei. Are you kidding me? It's true. Didn't you see that the tianlei retreated a little when she went forward? I don't know why, but I feel that the tianlei are a little afraid of her. Hearing this, everyone's first reaction was that it was ridiculous and unbelievable. They had only heard that people were in awe of the tianlei. When had they ever heard that the tianlei were afraid of people? Wasn't this too ridiculous? However, the situation above seemed to be a little strange. Just as everyone was doubting it, they saw a silver snake-like tianlei move forward hesitantly. Chu Luiyue raised her hand and easily grabbed the tianlei in her hand. Her red lips curled up, revealing a satisfied smile. Be obedient. After she finished speaking, she moved her finger, and the heavenly thunder instantly exploded. It turned into countless tiny streams of light that surged into her body. Continue. She raised her eyebrows slightly and moved her finger. Then, everyone saw a scene that they would never forget in their lives. In the tianlei sea, the slender and exquisite woman floated in the air. The tianlei seemed to be lining up, moving forward one after another and landing in her hand. Then, they exploded one after another, and the astonishing power contained in them all surged into her body. In a short period of time, the aura around her had risen rapidly, and it showed no signs of stopping. This scene that was beyond their understanding shocked everyone present. They couldn't recover from their shock for a long time. They couldn't be blamed for making a fuss. This kind of scene was too rare. No matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't imagine that when Chu Luiyue said, snatch, she was really snatching it with her bare hands. Shengguan Jing's tightly clenched hands slowly relaxed, and he secretly let out a long sigh of relief. This girl's trump card was really strong. The corners of Rongxiu's lips curled up slightly as he shook his head helplessly. Even the corners of his eyes carried a doting smile. She was even more playful than Dumpling. In fact, with her strength, she could have directly devoured all of these Tianlei. However, she wanted them to line up and step forward one by one. This was obviously done on purpose for the people below to see. Rongxiu turned to look at Wei Zhe. At this moment, he was looking up with a dazed expression. Head of family Wei. Rongxiu suddenly spoke. Wei Zhe was startled. He turned around to look, the shock in his eyes had yet to fade. Clearly, Chu Liuyue's move had far exceeded his expectations. Rongxiu raised his chin and said in a low and pleasant voice. You is about to catch up. Why aren't you moving faster? Wei Zhe's face instantly turned green and white. It was very interesting. Of course, he knew this. Did he need others to remind him? Now that Rongxiu said all this, it was obvious that he was purposely taunting her. Wei Zhe took a deep breath and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. He said coldly, Head Yu's strength is indeed outstanding. However, I'm a little worried. With Head Yu's current level, if you forcefully devour too many Tianlei, I'm afraid your body won't be able to. Looks like head of family Wei doesn't know. Rongxiu interrupted him with a smile. Yu Er's divine body was formed by devouring the God-destroying tribulation. Although these Tianlei are fierce, they should be slightly inferior to the God-destroying tribulation, right? If you have the time to worry about Yu Er, why don't you think about what you're going to do if you lose this round? Wei Zhe's pupils shrank. A trace of deep shock flashed across his eyes. After a short moment of dead silence, gasps of cold air sounded one after another. God-destroying tribulation. Wasn't that something that could only be summoned by a venerable god expert? Furthermore, only those at the very top would be able to achieve this. Those who could successfully pass the God-destroying tribulation were even rarer. In the Divine Ruins world, it had been too long since anyone had summoned the God-destroying tribulation. However, Rongxiu actually said that not only did Chu Liyue summon it, he even used it as an opportunity to refine his divine body. Many people's first reaction was disbelief. However, Rongxiu's expression was calm and there was even a smile at the corner of his lips. How did he look like he was lying? Moreover, whether this was true or not, they would know after trying it out. Now that Chu Liyue was in the Sea of Lightning and could easily devour the Tianlei, wasn't it enough to explain everything? Gorgeous soft armor, it's really the God-destroying tribulation. Someone couldn't help but murmur in shock. Most of the people present were the top blacksmiths, so they more or less had some understanding of the God-destroying tribulation. At this moment, looking at Chu Liyue and her performance before and after, what was there to doubt? How powerful was the God-destroying tribulation? Compared to these Tianlei, it was more than just a little bit better. Chu Liyue could even deal with it, let alone these. No wonder. No wonder she was able to defeat Yi Wentao. With such a divine body, his combat strength is indeed comparable to a venerable god. Naturally, she could easily snatch all of these Tianlei. At this moment, the one who felt the most uncomfortable was Wei Zhe. Chu Liyue's actions were equivalent to directly cutting off his path to Tianlei. As long as a Tianlei wanted to come towards him, Chu Liyue would quickly move and devour it before he could. The key was that she did it directly, simple and fast. Straightforward and efficient. She didn't even give him time to react. In a short while, all of the Tianlei were intercepted, and the sky above Wei Zhe was empty. At this moment, Chu Liyue didn't seem unable to withstand the power of the Tianlei. In fact, she seemed to be in better spirits. She only needed to focus on that battle, and the surrounding Tianlei would continuously fall into her hands and become her power. Wei Zai's body trembled, and something seemed to be surging wildly in his chest. Finally, he couldn't help but stand up. At this moment, the number of Tianlei that Chu Luiyue had devoured had already surpassed his. More importantly, as long as she continued to snatch Tianlei, he wouldn't be able to get a single Tianlei. What was the point of continuing this competition? Seeing his actions, Chu Luiyue stopped as well. What, is the head of the family Wei admitting defeat? She asked with a smile. Wei Zai's throat was filled with a thick stench of blood, but he forced it back down. He spoke with difficulty. You are ruthless. This time, you win. He had exhausted all the energy in his body, and he couldn't continue. If he forced it, he would probably die here today. He wanted to obtain Tang Ke's inheritance, but he wanted to live even more. Chu Luiyue's smile deepened. Head of the family Wei, thank you for letting me win. Wei Zai didn't want to say another word to Chu Luiyue. He reached out his hand, intending to put away the purple-black hammer. However, at this moment, a reddish-gold figure suddenly flew past him and snatched the hammer away. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2072. Wei Zai was shocked and quickly looked up. The one who did it was none other than Dumpling. Previously, she had been wandering around, so Wei Zai didn't take her seriously. In addition, all his attention was on Chu Luiyue. In a moment of carelessness, Dumpling took advantage of the loophole. At this moment, Dumpling was holding the hammer in her hand and sizing it up seriously. She knocked it with her hand and sniffed it with her nose. Her face was full of curiosity and inquiry. Wei Zai was scared out of his wits. He immediately pointed at Dumpling and shouted in a trembling voice. You! What are you doing? Hurry up and return this old man's things. Dumpling grinned. What's the hurry? I just felt that this thing was a little strange and wanted to take a look at it. I'll return it to you later. As she spoke, she looked at the hammer in her hand with a puzzled expression. This thing wasn't heavy. At a glance, it didn't look any different from an ordinary hammer. There seemed to be some patterns engraved on it, but she couldn't understand it. Boom! A cluster of flames burned in Dumpling's hand and quickly surrounded the hammer. Wei Zai's eyes almost rolled back, and he almost fainted. This time, he was so angry that he couldn't speak. Shengwanyu. Don't go too far. This crimson gold heavenly phoenix was her contracted fiend. If she hadn't secretly instructed it, this crimson gold heavenly phoenix wouldn't have suddenly attacked. Chu Luiyue finally flew down from the sea of lightning and came to Dumpling's side. She touched Dumpling's round hair bun, then looked up at Wei Zai and smiled. Family Wei, why are you so nervous? Dumpling is still a child. It's inevitable that she's curious and wants to play. Don't mind her taking your things. After all, we can't snatch your things in front of so many people, right? Wei Zai was furious. Now that the item was in their hands, how could this not be considered robbery? That belongs to this old man. You are already offending him. Shengwanyu, this old man has already admitted defeat. What else do you want? Chu Luiyue blinked. Family Wei, you've misunderstood me. I really don't want to do anything. After all, this belongs to you, doesn't it? Dumpling, hurry up and return the things to the family Wei. Dumpling seemed a little regretful when she heard this, but she still nodded obediently. Oh! She grabbed the hammer with both hands and handed it over to Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue took the item. The flames on it also dissipated, revealing its original appearance. Chu Luiyue looked down and sized him up, raising his eyebrows slightly. The flames of the crimson gold heavenly phoenix were unable to leave any marks on it. It was not even able to detect any abnormalities. This was the most unusual thing. Even the best refined iron in the world would not remain unchanged after being tossed around by Dumpling. Moreover, the material of this hammer was only above average. Dumpling tugged at Chu Liyue's sleeve. A trace of regret flashed across her grape-like big eyes. There was really something wrong with this item. However, she could not figure out what was going on even after looking at it for a while. Chu Liyue pinched her little face and then handed her the hammer. Family Wei, your item. Wei Zhe was about to step forward when Chu Liyue suddenly took back the item. He raised his eyebrows and said with a half-smile, I'm not going to lie to you. To tell you the truth, I'm also very curious about this treasure of yours. Previously, I had used 3 sacred weapons and 8 Dozun stage divine weapons. However, you only relied on this iron hammer to firmly suppress me. This thing of yours is simply more powerful than a sacred weapon. Wei Zhe's heart skipped a beat. No matter what, that's my business. It has nothing to do with you. How can it have nothing to do with me? You almost defeated me with this item. I'm just curious. It doesn't seem like a big deal to ask a few more questions, right? As Chu Liyue spoke, he held the hammer in his hand and weighed it in his hand. He seemed to be eager to give it a try. Although the Thousand Peaks halberd did not recognize you as its master, why would you care about those things when you have such a treasure? Wei Zhe was furious and immediately attacked. Chi! A few silver needles flew out. They instantly enveloped Chu Liyue. The two of them were very close to each other. Wei Zhe's attack came without any warning. Chu Liyue had just heard the sound of the air being torn apart. When he looked over, he saw that the silver needles had already flown to his eyes. There was no way to avoid them. At this moment, a golden barrier suddenly condensed in front of him. Clang! 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 The silver needles were blocked. After a series of clanging sounds, they were crushed into powder by the terrifying pressure of the barrier before they could fall to the ground. They disappeared in an instant. Wei Zhe sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at the tall figure that had appeared in front of Chu Liyue out of nowhere. Rong Xiu's strength was already so powerful. Family Wei clan leader. You attacked without a word. Isn't your temper a little too impatient? Rong Xiu spoke slowly, but his voice was cold. You're in such a hurry. Are you worried that we will snatch your item in public, or do you have something that can't be seen? As soon as Rong Xiu finished speaking, Wei Zhe was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He retorted harshly. Rong Xiu, don't make irresponsible remarks. Chu Liyue's eyes suddenly focused. Rong Xiu tilted his head. What's wrong? Chu Liyue hesitated for a moment, raised his eyes to look at him, and handed the hammer over. Take a look. The aura inside was inexplicably familiar. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2073. Rong Xiu took the item. The moment he touched the hammer, he raised his eyebrows and narrowed his eyes. Seeing his reaction, Chu Liyue was even more certain of his guess. Rong Xiu was silent for a moment, then he looked up. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and they both knew what the other was thinking. The aura inside, it was very similar. Wei Zhe's eyes were fixed on the two of them, and his back was already drenched in sweat. The two of them were very cunning. Could it be that they had really discovered something? Just as he was feeling extremely nervous, Rong Xiu suddenly walked over with the hammer. Wei Zhe held his breath. Rong Xiu's every step felt like he was stepping on his heart. Soon, Rong Xiu stood a step away from Wei Zhe. Then, he handed the item over with a relaxed expression and chuckled. Why are you so nervous, Family Wei Master? I'll return it to you. Wei Zhe looked at him suspiciously. After confirming that he was not joking, he reached out and took the hammer. The moment the item fell into his hands, his heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally settled down. However, Rong Xiu's next sentence immediately made him nervous again. Oh right, I suddenly thought of something. Why haven't I seen Family Way Master on the way here? Young Family Way Master was way sheeping. Back then, he had colluded with outsiders to frame Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu, and was expelled from Lingxiao College. Since then, Wei Shiping had never appeared again. Now that Rong Xiu suddenly mentioned him, many people did not even realize who he was talking about. Wei Zai's heart sank. He unconsciously clenched the hammer in his hand and quickly glanced at Rong Xiu. But Rong Xiu's eyes were as deep as the sea, and his expression was calm and indifferent. Nothing could be seen. Wei Zai said reluctantly, "You. Why are you suddenly asking this?" Rong Xiu said, "It's nothing. I just thought of him when I saw you." Family Way Master. Can't answer. Wei Zai paused for a moment. There's nothing hard to answer. He had disappeared ever since he left Lingxiao College. We also know where he is now. Rong Xiu smiled faintly. He's your son. Although he did make a mistake back then, he didn't deserve to die. I didn't expect you to be so heartless. Wei Zai frowned and said coldly, he did something wrong and disgraced my family way. This is what he should bear. How can you talk about being heartless? It seemed that he was still angry at the mention of Wei Shiping. I see, Rong Xiu's face showed a trace of regret. What a pity. I heard that you originally thought highly of him as the successor of the Family Way Master. Wei Zai's face was livid. Obviously, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He turned and left. When he left, he put away the hammer. Rong Xiu looked at his back meaningfully, but didn't say anything more. Girl. Tang Ke's voice came again. Congratulations, you won. This voice immediately attracted everyone's attention. Chu Luiyue raised her head slightly, her red lips curling. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. Tang Ke said, my inheritance is behind one of the 10 bronze doors. Now, you can choose one. If you can choose it, everything will be yours. If you can't, you can only blame yourself for not being fated to be with me. Everyone looked at each other. They thought that after winning this round, Chu Luiyue could directly get Tang Ke's inheritance. Who knew that they would have to choose again? Choosing 1 out of 10, the probability was too low. Chu Luiyue didn't seem surprised. She smiled and nodded gently. Okay. She knew that Tang Ke wouldn't give everything away so easily, so it was normal for her to set this up. Tang Ke was quite surprised to see her agree so readily. You agreed so readily. Aren't you worried that you'll make the wrong choice and end up with nothing? Chu Luiyue shook her head and smiled in relief. I've done all I can. As for whether I'll have this opportunity, it's up to God. No matter what the result is, I have no regrets. Tang Ke paused for a moment, then suddenly laughed. Ha 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 ha. You're quite interesting, girl. Good. Now, I'll clear the field for you. You choose. As soon as she finished speaking, a powerful force swept over and went straight for everyone. Immediately after, they felt as if they were being pulled by something, and everything before their eyes instantly turned dark. Chu Luiyue turned around. The huge space became empty, and she was the only one left. Oh, no, Rong Xiu was also there. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes. Tang Ke's voice sounded again. You're Rong Xiu, right? Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. Although you didn't participate in the competition just now, the halberd of 10,000 peaks has recognized you as its master. After all, it was made by me personally. For its sake, I'll give you a chance. After this girl chooses, you can also choose once. Rong Xiao cupped his fists. Thank you, Senior Tang Ku. Chu Luiyue touched her chin. Tisk, to think that she had worked so hard to get such an opportunity. However, Rong Xiao was so easy to get. From the beginning to the end, he didn't seem to have done anything. His luck was really incomparable. Girl, you go first. Chu Luiyue stopped thinking and looked at the 10 doors around her. Every door was exactly the same, and she couldn't see any difference. If it were someone else, she would have taken a gamble. Unfortunately, she wasn't. With a thought, the armillary shield appeared in her hand. Clang! The armillary shield fell to the ground, and several cracks spread on the ground. At this moment, it seemed that the entire space trembled. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2074. I'm blind. Why don't I let the armillary shield help me choose? As Chu Luiyue spoke, she placed one hand on the armillary shield. She held her breath and focused, injecting a stream of force into it. Buzz! In the next moment, a faint blue stream of light appeared on the armillary shield. The mysterious runes engraved on it also seemed even more mysterious under the illumination of the faint glow. Chu Luiyue waited quietly. However, after a quarter of an hour, the armillary shield did not react at all. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. When she was outside the door, she clearly felt the armillary shield fluctuate. Why was it now? She waited for a while, but there was still no change. The armillary shield did not help her choose. Tang Ku's voice sounded faintly. You're really smart, girl. Unfortunately, although the armillary shield can sense my presence, it can't help you choose. You should do it yourself. Chu Luiyue paused. Her fingers slowly swept across the secret runes on the armillary shield, and a look of deep thought flashed across her eyes. The bronze door knocker had a similar pattern. It was definitely not a coincidence. However, for some reason, the armillary shield seemed to be suppressed by some force here. Although the feeling was very subtle, she could still tell. Tang Ku seemed to not want her to use the armillary shield. Countless thoughts flashed through Chu Luiyue's mind, but her face remained calm. After a short hesitation, she finally raised her head. Okay. Tang Ku asked her to choose, so she would choose. At the same time, outside the tomb, Shengguan Jing only felt that the world was spinning. After about 15 minutes, the surrounding darkness gradually faded. When his feet stepped on the ground again, Shengguan Jing heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately looked around and saw a tightly shut door. It was the door that Chu Luiyue had opened and let them in. At this moment, the door was locked. The bronze door knocker shook twice and stopped. Everything seemed to have returned to its original state. All kinds of voices came from behind. It was the group of people who had been sent out at the same time. At this moment, they had all woken up. Everyone looked at each other in dismay and quickly understood. They had been sent back to the stone forest by Tang Ku. Are we out? Why isn't Shengguan Yu online? She's going to receive Senior Tang Ku's inheritance, so of course she's not here. Didn't Senior Tang Ku say that she was the only one left there? When she came out, the entire Divine Ruins world would probably change, right? This was not an exaggeration. Tang Ku was the undisputed top refiner in the Divine Ruins world. Whoever could inherit his mantle would almost certainly have a successful future. With his favor, Chu Luiyue was very likely to break through and become a refining saint in the future. At that time, her identity would really be different. She couldn't tell where Tang Ku's voice came from, and she couldn't be sure which door the fluctuation on the celestial shield had sensed the existence behind. Therefore, she could only choose blindly. After a while, Chu Luiyue raised her hand and pointed at the door on the left in the middle. Senior Tang Ku, I choose this. Once you make a choice, you can't regret it. I'll ask you again. Are you sure? I'm sure. Tang Ku paused for a moment and suddenly laughed. Good. Since you've made up your mind, then. Just go forward and push the door open. Chu Luiyue composed herself and stepped forward. After taking a step, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at Rong Xiu beside her. She remembered that Tang Ku had said that after she made her choice, Rong Xiu would also have the same chance. She wanted to know which one Rong Xiu had chosen. Why don't you choose first, and then we'll set off together? Before Rong Xiu had time to speak, Tang Ku's voice sounded again. No. He can only choose after you go in. Chu Luiyue wrinkled her nose. This famous senior Tang Ku was indeed powerful, but there were too many rules, yes. Although she also knew that the two of them had different choices and it should be difficult for them to meet after going in, she was just a little curious. She didn't expect that even this was not allowed. Rong Xiu laughed and walked over to hold her hand. His slightly calloused fingers gently slid across her palm, causing her to tremble slightly. He wrapped his long arms around her and pulled her into his arms. The light cold fragrance instantly surrounded Chu Luiyue. He put his chin on her forehead and rubbed it gently. His voice was low. Don't worry. I'll find you as soon as possible. Chu Luiyue nodded subconsciously, then looked up at him and smiled. We've chosen different doors. If you find me, I'm afraid it's not convenient. Anyway, we'll probably come back in the end. Why don't we meet here? There seemed to be a dark light in Rong Xiu's eyes, and his thin scarlet lips curved slightly. Okay. He would never refuse her request. Then I'll go first. Chu Luiyue blinked, then turned and walked toward the door she had chosen. This place was spacious and empty. However, after swallowing the Tian Lei, she had recovered a lot of her strength, so she was quite fast. In a short while, she arrived at the door. Taking a deep breath, she finally raised her hand and placed it on the bronze door. It was cold to the touch, rough and heavy. She exerted a little force. Creak, the door in front of her opened with a creak. A vicissitude and distant aura hit her in the face. It was as if she had opened a dusty box that had been sealed for many years. She could even smell a trace of the ancient smell from it. She focused her eyes and looked inside. It was pitch black. No one knew what was inside. Chu Luiyue composed herself and walked inside. Her figure quickly disappeared into the darkness. Bang! The bronze door closed again, completely blocking Rong Xiu's line of sight. The spacious space fell into silence again. Rong Xiu stared at the door for a while, then looked away. At this moment, the gentleness and affection in his eyes had completely disappeared. It was replaced by the usual coldness and solemnity. It was as if the mountains and rivers had frozen over 1,000 miles, and the cold air was awe-inspiring. The surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped a lot. After a while, his thin lips opened slightly. Tang Ku. You're presumptuous. Wonderful book house. Chu Luiyue calmed down and walked forward. After walking through a narrow passage, she found that there was a silver barrier at the end. As for the faint glow, it was coming from the barrier. Chu Luiyue looked carefully. The pressure on this barrier was extremely strong, but it didn't seem dangerous. She hesitated and stretched out her hand, but was surprised to find that her hand easily passed through the barrier. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes in surprise. She had never encountered such a situation before, after hesitating for a moment, she walked forward. As expected, her whole body passed through easily. Just as she was full of doubts, she was shocked by the scene in front of her. Behind the barrier was a completely different world. Looking ahead, it was a flat and wide field. Under the vast sky, 2 tombstones stood quietly. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2076. Loneliness, loneliness, and bleakness. These were the emotions that surged into Chu Liyue's heart when she saw the 2 tombstones. Apart from these 2 tombstones, there was nothing else in the entire field. It was as if they had been standing here since an extremely long time ago. As if driven by some force, Chu Liyue stepped forward. She frowned as soon as she took a step. In this place, he couldn't fly. This place was clearly not a normal natural world, but a unique small space. "Ah, do you want me to bring you there?" Dumpling's voice came from her heart. Chu Liyue shook her head. No need. Even she was greatly suppressed, so Tuanzi might not be spared either. Anyway, there was nothing to be anxious about. She might as well walk over slowly. She suddenly thought of something and looked back. That silver barrier was like a flame, quickly burning away. In an instant, the void was empty. At this moment, she had completely entered this strange small space. Chu Liyue pursed her lips and walked toward the 2 tombstones. Although she could not fly, she had already tempered her divine body, so her speed was not slow. About 2 hours later, she finally arrived in front of the 2 tombstones. The tombstones were carved from white jade and were about the height of a person. Probably because they had been through too much wind, frost, and rain, there were already traces of time on them. The words on the tombstones were already a little blurry. But if one looked carefully, they could still be distinguished. The strange thing was that only one of the 2 tombstones had words on it. Chu Liyue looked to her right. There was a line of words carved on the tombstone. Tang Ku's tomb. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. Although the outside world had always said that Tang Ku was dead, and even before they came in, they had always thought that this was Tang Ku's tomb. But in fact, Tang Ku clearly still had a soul left. He was not dead at all. Then, who set up this tombstone? Other than Tang Ku, there should be no one else here. Could it be that he carved it himself? Chu Liyue felt a burst of absurdity and disbelief at the thought that came to his mind. However, other than this answer, no other explanation seemed to make sense. She looked at the tombstone on the left. The surface was smooth and flat, and there were no words carved on it. The nameless tomb. Chu Liyue rested his chin on his hand and fell into deep thought. To be able to stand side by side with Tang Ku's tomb, the person buried under this tombstone was naturally not an ordinary person. But why was there no name on it? Was it because the person who set up the monument didn't know who this person was, or this person's name couldn't appear on it? Chu Liyue carefully recalled Tang Ku's life. Back then, he had left the Tang clan alone. After he disappeared without a trace, the people of the Tang family were quickly exterminated. It was unlikely that the person below was anyone else from the Tang family. Then, who could it be? Tang Ku could summon the wind and summon the rain. It was hard to imagine what kind of person he would allow to be buried with him. Chu Liyue didn't think that Tang Ku didn't know the situation here. Did he let me in on purpose? Chu Liyue had a lot of questions in her mind. She stared at the nameless tombstone and fell into deep thought. Suddenly, a name appeared in her mind. Wait a minute. Back then, there was indeed a person who disappeared almost at the same time as Tang Ku. It was that person, Mr. Su. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Liyue's eyes flashed. Those sacred artifacts actually flew out and landed in front of the nameless tombstone. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2077. A ray of light flew out of the heavenly square cauldron and landed on the tombstone. It was as if the intense darkness was suddenly torn apart by the light. Something gradually appeared on the tombstone. Chu Liuyue's eyebrows moved slightly. Then, the flowing cloud flying diagram and the great azure sun axe appeared. The three rays of light converged. A mysterious rune was revealed bit by bit. Chu Liyue looked at it. These runes were somewhat familiar. She seemed to have seen them on the armillary's shield. In order to confirm her thoughts, she summoned the armillary's shield and carefully examined it. Indeed, these runes were exactly the same as the one on the armillary's shield. However, the runes engraved on the tombstone were only half of those on the armillary's shield. Moreover, these runes seemed to be sealed by something. After the light of the three divine artifacts surged, only a part of them was lit up. The rest of the runes were dark and could not be seen clearly. Could it be that 5 divine artifacts were required to be here at the same time to reveal their original appearance? Chu Liyue crossed her arms and fell into deep thought. However, the reaction of the 3 divine artifacts was enough to prove that this was very likely Mr. Su's tomb. The 2 of them were buried in the same place. Chu Liyue took a deep breath. Her heart was still surging with waves. The world only knew that the 2 of them had a shocking battle back then. After the battle ended in a draw, they disappeared without a trace. Who would have thought that their tombstones were erected together? Tang Ko asked her to come in. Could it be related to Mr. Su? After all, she had 3 divine artifacts made by Mr. Su. Suddenly, a fluctuation appeared on the armillary's shield. Then, a faint glow overflowed from it and covered half of it. Chu Liyue was very familiar with this feeling. In the beginning, when she was outside and before she came in, the armillary's shield had shown a similar reaction. So, it was not Tang Ko's summon, but Mr. Su's tomb. After that, Chu Liyue subconsciously raised her hand and reached forward. Her palm gently covered the runes. Thump. 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 The sound of a heartbeat came from the tombstone. Chu Liyue was shocked. This heartbeat was not hers. Just as she was about to retreat, she suddenly saw that under her palm, there was a sudden burst of light. Almost at the same time, the force in her body began to surge toward the tombstone at an astonishing speed. Not good. Chu Liyue sensed that something was amiss and immediately increased his strength. However, he was shocked to find that he could no longer withdraw his hand from the tombstone. There seemed to be something inside that was madly devouring her origin power. As for her body, it was as if it was being suppressed by an invisible force. She was unable to move. Bang bang. The sound of his heartbeat became clearer and clearer. Chu Liyue could feel the force in his body rapidly depleting. She frowned. Fortunately, she had stored an extremely shocking amount of origin power within her dantian. Otherwise, just this short consumption would have been enough to overdraft her. Ah, you! Sensing that something was wrong, Dumpling also jumped out. Seeing Chu Liyue's frown, Dumpling was also very anxious. She and Chu Liyue were bound by a life contract, so she knew very well that Chu Liyue's energy was being devoured at a frightening speed. Ah, you, let me help you. Dumpling was about to step forward, but Chu Liyue immediately stopped her in her tracks. Stop right there. Don't come over. The aura within the tombstone was extremely powerful. More importantly, it was clearly coming for her. Even Dumpling would not be of much help. If she was not careful, she might even implicate Dumpling. Dumpling heard this and instinctively stood rooted to the ground. However, seeing Chu Liyue's rapidly pale face, her heart also clenched. Her grape-like eyes were instantly covered by a layer of mist. Ah, you, Chu Liyue took a deep breath. Zi Chen. As soon as she finished speaking, a black figure flashed in front of her. Zichen also responded to the summons. Chu Luiyue said. Help me look after Dumpling. Zichen nodded. Yes. After speaking, he was about to move when he saw fine beads of sweat continuously appearing on Chu Luiyue's forehead. A rare hint of hesitation appeared on his cold and indifferent face. Master, do you really not need help? Looking at her like this really made him feel uneasy. Chu Luiyue forced a smile. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. The reason why she asked Zichen and Dumpling to temporarily retreat was that even she felt that the situation was too dangerous. If something happened, the three of them would be directly wiped out. Therefore, after careful consideration, this was the most appropriate choice. Zichen instantly understood her thoughts. He pursed his thin lips and nodded. Zichen will not disappoint you. Master, please be careful. After speaking, he moved and came to Dumpling's side. At this moment, Dumpling was about to step forward barefooted. Before she could take 2 steps, Zichen blocked her way. Master, you mean to wait and see? Zichen lowered his head and looked at the little one in front of him. His voice was as cold as usual. Dumpling's line of sight was blocked by 2 long legs. When she heard this, she raised her head and put her hands on her waist indignantly. But now Yu is in danger. I want to go. She snorted indignantly and changed direction. She walked around Zichen with her short legs, intending to rush over. As she walked, she muttered. I'm the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. And I've already opened my 5th meridian. I can definitely help you. Even if I can't, I can call Grandpa clan leader and the others. Before she finished speaking, her body suddenly flew into the air. It was actually Zichen who had directly scooped her up. Whatever she says is the truth. Dumpling's small body was easily locked in his arms. She began to struggle with all her might. Let go of me. I want to go over. However, her small body was not worth mentioning in front of Zichen. Although her strength had increased greatly, Zichen was not to be trifled with. After all, behind Zichen stood the great Phoenix Dragon Clan's clan leader, Mao Zhen. The current Dumpling was still very young compared to her. Seeing that Dumpling was unwilling to give up, Zichen narrowed his eyes and said coldly. If you're not afraid of delaying her, go ahead. As soon as he said that, Tuanzi finally calmed down. She was just worried about Yu. After thinking for a long time, she looked up at Zichen. Are you saying that Yu will really be fine? Zichen raised his chin. You just have to watch for yourself. He was also her contracted magical beast, and his worries were no less than Dumpling's. But he knew that Chu Luiyue did not need their help at this time. That tombstone, from the beginning, it was targeted at her. Time passed slowly. Chu Luiyue's face was pale. Her vision turned black. This was a sign of exhaustion. She closed her eyes. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2078. At this moment, the amount of energy that was being drained from her had exceeded the limit of an ordinary high god. If not for the abundant force stored in her body, she would have died from exhaustion. However, the scary thing was that this was not the end. It was as if there was a bottomless pit in the tombstone that was constantly draining her energy. Chu Luiyue closed her eyes and adjusted her breathing as she pondered. What was hidden in there? Thump. 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 Chu Luiyue took a deep breath and opened her eyes again. Under her palm, the originally dim areas of the runes engraved on the tombstone were gradually lighting up. Obviously, it was benefiting from the fact that it was draining her energy. Chu Luiyue suddenly curled her lips and smiled helplessly. If I had known this would happen, I would have snatched the remaining divine weapons first. If all 5 of Mr. Su's divine weapons were in her hands, she would not have committed such a grave crime. But at this moment, things had already come to this point, and all of this could only be said. Chu Luiyue closed her eyes. Outsiders would probably think that she was accepting Tang Ke's inheritance. Who would have thought that she was going through something like this? She finally understood that Senior Tang Ke was actually trying to lure her here. There was probably no hope for the inheritance anymore. Now, she only hoped that she could get out of here in one piece. I wonder what kind of relationship Mr. Su has with him that he would go through so much trouble, Chu Luiyue mumbled to herself. Crack. Suddenly, a faint cracking sound could be heard. Chu Luiyue was stunned and immediately turned her head to look. The last dim area of the ruins was finally completely covered by the lustrous light. Buzz! In an instant, the light shone brightly. Chu Luiyue felt a vast and majestic aura suddenly surging out from the tombstone. It was coming straight for her. She was shocked and immediately retreated. But this time, the inexplicable pressure around her finally dissipated, and she quickly retreated a distance away. Chu Luiyue did not expect that she could successfully retreat. She looked at her palm in shock. Did they split up? That tombstone, she instinctively looked up and saw that the light on the tombstone was rapidly gathering. Then, it gradually condensed into a translucent figure. It was a woman who looked to be in her 20s. She wore a light green dress and had a slender figure. Her black hair casually fell to her ankles and she wore a silver-white headband inlaid with rubies. Her facial features were delicate and beautiful. When she looked over, her eyes were like spring water, warm and gentle. With a single glance, one could tell that she was an extremely gentle woman. She stepped forward, crossed her hands in front of her stomach, and curtsied toward Chu Luiyue. Suli, thanks miss for saving my life. Her voice was melodious and it was sweet. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes slightly. This, Mr. Su? She asked in disbelief. When Suli smiled, 2 small dimples appeared on the corners of her lips. You. Suli will never forget Mrs. Kindness. It's really her. Chu Luiyue looked as if she was struck by lightning. She stared blankly at the woman in front of her, but her heart was in turmoil. Suli. Mr. Su, who was rumored to be all-powerful and equally matched with Tang Ke, was actually a woman. Chu Luiyue spent a lot of effort to calm the waves in her heart. She opened her mouth but did not know what to say. There were so many versions of the rumors, but none of them said that Mr. Su was a woman. All of this happened too suddenly, and even Chu Luiyue was dazed. She had always thought that Mr. Su was an old man or a middle-aged man with a strong physique. Anyway, he was very different from the beautiful and gentle woman in front of her. May I know your name, miss? Seeing that Chu Luiyue did not speak, Suli thought that her sudden appearance had startled her, so she asked gently. She could not know the woman's name since she had saved her life. Chu Luiyue gradually regained her rationality. Shangguan Yu. So it's Miss Shangguan. Suli smiled and looked at the armillary shield beside Chu Luiyue. Her eyes flashed with a hint of emotion. Miss Shangguan, are you from Peach Blossom Dock? Chu Luiyue followed her gaze and looked over. It was normal for Suli to guess that since the armillary shield was here. She sorted out her thoughts and said, yes. It seems that Peach Blossom Dock belongs to Miss Shangguan now. Chu Luiyue was stunned for a moment. How did Mr. Su know? Suli covered her mouth and smiled. Since the armillary shield has recognized Miss Shangguan as its owner, Peach Blossom Dock naturally belongs to Miss Shangguan. Chu Luiyue had already guessed that Peach Blossom Dock was related to the armillary shield. After hearing Su Li's words, she was even more certain. The battle between Su Li and Tang Ke took place at Peach Blossom Dock. Half of the runes of the armillary shield were engraved on her tombstone. It was normal for her to know about this. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly. Mr. Su is indeed wise. Su Li smiled again. Miss Shengwan, you are treating me as an outsider. Chu Luiyue shook her head and smiled. You are a senior, and everyone calls you Mr. Su. I am used to calling you that. Although the Su Li in front of her was gentle, generous, elegant, and calm, she wouldn't forget that half of the current 10 great sacred artifacts were created by her. Such a person was definitely worthy of being addressed as Mr. Su Li's eyes flickered, as if she had fallen into a distant memory. After a long time, she smiled and sighed. Back then, I disguised myself as a man and walked around the world of divine ruins, so that was why everyone misunderstood her true identity. Chu Luiyue nodded. Actually, she had already guessed this. Su Li's battle with Tang Ke was already shocking enough. If everyone knew that she was a woman, it would probably cause even more shock. Su Li said with a guilty look on her face. Speaking of which, just now, I didn't want to forcefully devour Miss Shengwan's force. I hope Miss Shengwan can forgive me. Speaking of this, Chu Luiyue also had a lot of questions. Mr. Su, you mean, was she not the one who did all this? As if she had seen Chu Luiyue's doubts, Su Li sighed softly and turned to look at the tombstone. Miss Shengwan, do you know who erected this tombstone? Chu Luiyue hesitated for a moment. Senior Tang Ke. Su Li nodded, and a touch of worry appeared between her eyebrows. In fact, these 2 tombstones were erected by him. After that battle, I died and my soul scattered, but he survived. It was because of his help that my soul was preserved and I slept until now. Wonderful book house. It was only after I broke through to become a weapon refining venerable and my master passed away that I started to roam the divine ruins world. Chu Luiyue understood. I see, this also explained why the world had never heard of her name. She had indeed been cultivating in peace all this time. At that time, I was young and ignorant. I heard that Tang Ke was very famous and was the #1 artificer in the world. Therefore, I sent a letter of challenge. Su Li was still emotional when she mentioned the past. Who would have thought that so many things would happen at Peach Blossom Cove, wonderful book house. Chapter 2080. She paused and did not continue. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed at her tombstone. When Tang Ke erected these 2 tombstones, he deliberately left a mechanism on them. If someone comes here, the mechanism will automatically activate and forcibly deprive him of his strength. In other words, no matter who comes here, it will be the same. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. If that was the case, it was too domineering. It would be fine if she was the one who came here today. But if it were someone else, he or she would not be so lucky to escape. Su Li nodded and comforted her. But don't worry. Although I didn't know about the mechanism before, you should be the only one who has come here all these years. Chu Luiyue heaved a sigh of relief at first, but then her expression became a little strange. Why did it sound like Tang Ke had been waiting for her here since early in the morning? Su Li sighed and continued to speak. He must have known that the armillary shield has recognized you as its owner, so he let you in. In fact, Chu Luiyue thought so too. So, only the owner of the armillary shield can help you. You can say that. Su Li smiled bitterly. After all, it was the armillary shield that caused my death and his serious injuries. Chu Luiyue was shocked. Didn't you two compete in weapon refining at the Peach Blossom Dock? What does this have to do with the armillary shield? Su Li paused, looked up, and stared at Chu Luiyue. Miss Shengwan, you don't know. Tang Ku and I were only weapon refining venerables at that time. The reason why we could break through the shackles and refine 5 divine weapons is actually related to the armillary shield. At that time, the armillary shield suddenly appeared in the world. We both knew that it was extraordinary and fought fiercely for it. During the process, the power of the armillary shield dissipated, causing chaos in the Peach Blossom Dock. The divine weapons that we refined at that time were further refined and became divine weapons by chance. Chu Liuyue's pupils suddenly shrank. Su Li's words were indeed a shocking secret. You mean, the reason why you and Senior Tang Ku were able to refine the 10 great sacred weapons was actually because of the power of the armillary shield? A small dimple appeared on Su Li's lips and she sighed softly. I don't know how much energy and mental energy is needed to refine a saint artifact. What's more, we were only venerables at that time. Even if we had heaven-defying abilities, how could we each refine 5 items at the same time? Chaotic Stone Forest. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. However, there was still no movement from the entrance. Everything looked exactly the same as it did in the beginning. There were no changes at all. Some people gradually became impatient. It's been so long. Why haven't they come out yet? TSK. That was the inheritance of the venerable artificer. How could he possibly use half a month's time? If you can't wait any longer, you can leave now. Why complain? I just thought it was a little strange, that's all. There's no other meaning. It's fine if Shanghai Yu hasn't come out, but why hasn't there been any movement from Rong Xiu either? He doesn't need such a long time to inherit Tang Ku's inheritance, right? That's hard to say. Don't forget that the Thousand Peaks Halberd has already recognized him as its master. That's a saint artifact that Tang Ku personally refined. Even if it's just for the sake of this thing, Tang Ku will still favor him a little, right? Maybe he's waiting for Shanghai Yu inside. All kinds of discussions were heard one after another. After a long time, it was inevitable that people would have all kinds of guesses in their hearts. Shengwan Jing listened at the side. He stroked his beard and looked at the closed door thoughtfully. In fact, he wasn't worried about their safety. He was just curious about their progress inside. If Yu could really inherit Tang Ku's inheritance, he would have another trump card in the future. At this moment, a sharp whistle came from the sky. Everyone looked up, but they didn't see anything. However, Wei Zhe, who had been staying in a remote corner, suddenly stood up. He raised his head to take a look and furrowed his brows. The family Wei's people were here. Wei Zhe hesitated for a moment and walked outside. Family Wei's people, follow me. His followers hurriedly followed after hearing this. Many people looked over when they heard the commotion. It seemed that Wei Zhe was planning to leave. Family Wei's leader, you're leaving just like that? Someone raised his voice and asked. They haven't come out yet. Wei Zhe stopped in his tracks. That whistle is used by my family Wei to transmit messages. I have to go out and take a look. Only then did everyone understand. It seemed that the matter was not small. Otherwise, Wei Zhe wouldn't have chosen to leave so decisively. In the previous competition, he came in second place and almost won Tang Ku's inheritance. Was he convinced? No one could tell. Everyone thought that he would insist on staying here until the 2 of them came out. However, since the family Wei had something to deal with, others naturally couldn't say much. Wei Zhe continued to leave with his followers. Perhaps because Tang Ku had already chosen the inheritor, Wei Zhe and the others didn't encounter any accidents when they left this time. They were unimpeded all the way. Soon, their figures disappeared behind many stones. Most people quickly looked away. Only Shangguan Jing stared in the direction Wei Zhe left for a long time. The person next to him asked curiously, "Shangguan, what are you looking at?" Shangguan Jing said, "Nothing. I just feel that Wei Zhe left a little suddenly. Didn't he say that it was because the family Wei's people came to invite him?" After all, the stone forest is the family Wei's territory, and he has been here for a long time. Maybe there really is something that he needs to go back to deal with in person. Shangguan Jing didn't say anything. He still felt that something was wrong. Wei Zhe came to the stone forest this time for Tang Ke's tomb. It was impossible for the Wei clan to be unaware of this. Since that was the case, Wei Zhe should have made sufficient arrangements and preparations. What urgent matter could be more important than Tang Ke's tomb? The family Wei's people came just like that. Did they not think that Wei Zhe might be inheriting Tang Ke's inheritance at this time? Unless, they knew that Wei Zhe didn't have anything important to do at this moment. Although Wei Zhe had been staying here ever since he came out, no one could guarantee that he hadn't contacted the outside world. And when he left just now, there was even a hint of urgency and haste in his movements. Shangguan Jing pondered for a long time but couldn't come up with an answer. In the end, he suppressed this suspicion. On the other side, Wei Zhe walked out of the stone forest smoothly. When he took the last step, he looked back. It was quiet in the stone forest. No one could imagine what had happened inside during this period of time. "Master." An old man was already waiting outside. When he saw him come out, he immediately stepped forward. "Wonderful book house." Although Tang Ke's condition is better than mine, erecting these 2 tombstones exhausted almost all of his energy. Chu Luyue pondered for a long time and finally asked. Then, why did Senior Tang Ke divide the runes on the celestial shield into 2 and engrave them on these 2 tombstones? Su Li looked back. Because this is the only way to wait until the day the celestial shield recognizes its master. She pointed at the 3 sage artifacts. Back then, the power in the celestial shield was divided into 2 by the 2 of us and then injected into the sage artifacts. If you want to completely awaken the celestial shield, you have to take back the power. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2082. Awaken the celestial shield. Chu Luyue was a little surprised. In her opinion, the celestial shield had already awakened when it caused the mountain fire in the Peach Blossom Dock. Moreover, it had already recognized her as its master. Why did it still need to be awakened now? As if sensing her doubts, Su Li shook her head with a smile and explained. You are indeed the master of the celestial shield, but it's not in its original state. I can't describe with words how powerful the celestial shield is when it's fully unleashed. However, if you want to become stronger, this is the step you have to take. She looked extremely serious. Chu Luyue paused and asked. If that's the case, what will happen to these divine artifacts in the end? Once the power is extracted, then wouldn't it become a pile of scrap metal again? You don't have to worry about this. Although the celestial shield's power is stored in these divine artifacts, awakening the celestial shield doesn't need to extract the power. All you need to do is to gather them. When 10 divine artifacts are gathered, the celestial shield will naturally awaken completely. Chu Luyue then felt more at ease. She didn't know about the other divine artifacts, but the ones she had now were extremely precious and powerful. She really couldn't bear to destroy it. So, what I need to do is to gather 10 divine artifacts. Su Li nodded. Chu Luyue rubbed her temples as she felt a headache coming on. Then you think too highly of me. It was easy to say, but it was very troublesome to do. After spending so much time and effort, she had only managed to obtain 3 of them. Excluding the Thousand Peaks halberd of the Rongxiu, there were still 6 divine artifacts. Where could she find them? If she guessed correctly, the remaining divine artifacts were now scattered among the major families and clans in the Divine Ruins world. Those were the treasures of their clans. How could she snatch them? Even if she was now the Peach Blossom Doc's lord, it was still as difficult as ascending to heaven. Su Li's lips curved into a smile. Lady Shangwan, this might be extremely difficult for others, but for you, it is indeed something you can do. Don't forget that the celestial shield is now in your hands. Chu Liuyue's mind flickered. Mr. Su, you mean, the 10 great sacred artifacts only broke through their shackles and became sacred artifacts with the help of the celestial globe shield's power. If the armillary heaven shield summons them, they will naturally come. Chu Liuyue's eyelids twitched violently. Mr. Su, are you asking me to rob you? Su Li blinked her eyes and smiled. Her dimples were shallow, and she said gently, I'm sorry. How can you say that it's a robbery? In this world, the strong were respected. Whoever had the ability would win. Besides, even the armillary heaven shield now belongs to you, Miss Shangwan, so why worry about those saint artifacts? That was yours in the first place. Outside the bronze door, Rongxiu stood with his hands behind his back. Tang Ke knelt not far behind him. Silence reigned in the vast space. Only the countless Tianlei in the sky were still rotating leisurely. The radiance was resplendent and dazzling. At a certain moment, Rongxiu's brows twitched and he turned around. Tang Ke immediately tensed up. Your Highness, Rongxiu looked at him indifferently. Get up. Tang Ke was stunned at first, but then he suddenly realized something, and his eyes were overflowing with excitement. Your Highness, you mean, it was done. It seemed that it was done inside. Because Rongxiu was here, he did not dare to secretly investigate the situation inside. At this moment, his heart was finally at ease. I dare not forget Master Yu's kindness. When Master Yu comes out safely, I will give you all my wealth. What he was talking about was the endless sea of thunder that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years. Rongxiu raised his brows slightly and said calmly, she won't be interested in your little things. Wonderful book house. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.